The desert has a way of keeping secrets. It swallows the bones of men who wandered too far from water. It buries the wreckage of wars that history forgot. And sometimes, in the small hours before dawn, it holds onto the ghosts of soldiers who refused to rest. Forward Operating Base Sentinel sat like a scar on the Arizona borderlands, a collection of concrete and steel that seemed to grow from the earth itself. The buildings were utilitarian, designed for function rather than comfort, their walls still warm from the punishing heat of the day. But inside the command wing, in a small office that smelled of gun oil and old coffee, the temperature had dropped to something almost cold. Commander Marcus Cole sat alone at his desk, the only light coming from a single lamp that cast long shadows across the room. The clock on the wall showed 3:17 in the morning. Most men his age would be asleep at this hour, dreaming of grandchildren or fishing trips or whatever retired warriors dreamed about. But Marcus Cole had never been most men. At 68 years old, he carried himself with the economy of movement that comes from decades of training. His hair had gone silver years ago, cropped military short against a scalp that bore the scars of shrapnel from a mortar round in Kuwait. His face was a topographical map of hard living, deep lines carved by sun and wind and the weight of decisions that no man should have to make. But his eyes were what people remembered. Pale blue, sharp as broken glass, they held the cold certainty of someone who had looked death in the face more times than most people had hot meals, and never once blinked first. 3 objects sat on the desk in front of him, arranged with the precision of a man who understood that details mattered. The first was a pistol, a Colt 1911, model from 1975, the bluing worn thin in places where his hand had gripped it through firefights on 3 continents. He had carried this weapon since he was 19 years old, a young Marine shipping out for his first tour. It had been with him in the jungles of Southeast Asia, in the shadow of the Berlin Wall, in the burning oil fields of Kuwait. The pistol had killed 17 men by his count, each one cataloged in his memory with the clinical precision of a surgeon recording procedures. It was more than a weapon now. It was an extension of his soul, a piece of metal that understood him better than any living person. The second object was a photograph, black and white, creased from years of handling, showing 2 young men in desert camouflage standing in front of a burned-out Iraqi tank. The date stamp read February 1991. Marcus recognized himself on the left, 35 years old and still believing he was immortal. The man on the right was Jake Sullivan, who everyone called Coyote because of the way he could howl like one after too many beers. Coyote had been his spotter for 3 years, the best marksman the Marine Corps had ever produced, a man who could read wind patterns like some people read newspapers. In the photograph, both men were smiling. Neither one knew that Coyote had less than a week to live. The third object was a letter, Official Department of Defense stationery, the 5th invitation to retirement he had received in as many years. The language was polite, almost deferential. The Pentagon appreciated his decades of service. They understood his unique expertise. They simply felt that perhaps it was time to let younger operators carry the burden. Marcus picked up the letter and held it under the lamp, reading the words for perhaps the 100th time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it back on the desk exactly where it had been. Retirement. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He had seen what happened to men who retired. They bought recreational vehicles and drove across the country looking for meaning in roadside attractions. They took up hobbies that occupied their hands but left their minds empty. They sat in recliners watching television, growing soft in body and spirit, waiting for death like passengers at a train station. Marcus Cole was not that kind of man. He would die on his feet, rifle in hand, doing the work that God or country or fate had put him on this earth to do. Not in some antiseptic hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of flowers slowly rotting. He reached for the photograph again, his weathered fingers tracing the outline of Coyote's face. 33 years, that was how long he had carried this particular ghost. 33 years of wondering whether he could have saved his friend if he had been faster, smarter, more aware of the counter-sniper repositioning on the ridge. 33 years of waking in the night, reaching for a weapon, certain that he could hear Coyote calling for help from somewhere just beyond the edge of darkness. The irony was not lost on him. He had killed men who deserved to die and some who probably did not. He had made decisions that changed the course of battles, that tilted the balance of shadow wars the public would never know about. He had been called a hero so many times that the word had lost all meaning. And yet here he sat at 3 in the morning, haunted by the one shot he did not take in time, the one life he could not save. The knock on his door was soft, almost apologetic. Marcus did not reach for the pistol. After 45 years, he could tell the difference between a threat and an interruption. "Come in." The door opened to reveal Sergeant Derek Stone, 38 years old, with the broad shoulders and skeptical eyes of a man who had seen enough combat to know that nothing was ever as simple as the briefing made it sound. Stone had served under Marcus for 6 years now, ever since an operation in Iraq where Marcus had pulled him out of an ambush that should have killed everyone involved. That kind of debt created loyalty that went beyond rank or regulation. "Commander?" Stone stepped into the office, his eyes automatically cataloging the items on the desk before settling on Marcus. "The team is assembled. Briefing is scheduled for DOS 600, but there is something you should know first." Marcus noted the tension in Stone's posture, the slight tightening around his jaw that indicated news he did not want to deliver. "Speak freely." Stone closed the door behind him. "Your grandson arrived 2 hours ago. Petty Officer Ethan Cole. He has been assigned to our unit for this operation." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. It might have been pride. It might have been fear. Most likely it was both. Ethan, the boy, was 19 years old, fresh out of Bud's training, at the top of his class just as Marcus had been 46 years before him. The genetic legacy of the Cole family ran strong in his veins, that particular combination of stubbornness and capability that had produced 3 generations of warriors. Marcus had watched the boy grow up from a distance, attending birthdays and graduations when missions allowed, always aware that his grandson had the same fire in his eyes that Marcus had seen in his own mirror half a century ago. "Who approved the assignment?" Stone hesitated. "Colonel James Cole, sir. Your son personally signed off on it." Marcus closed his eyes. Of course James had done this. His son had been trying to force a confrontation for months, pushing Marcus toward retirement through every channel available. What better way to finally corner the old man than to put his grandson in harm's way? James knew that Marcus would never refuse to take the mission, but he also knew that having Ethan in the unit would force Marcus to confront the one thing he had always avoided: the question of legacy, the question of what happened when the torch passed to the next generation, the question that every aging warrior eventually faced, whether the young ones were ready to carry the weight. "Where is he now?" "Barracks, sir. Getting settled with the rest of the team." "Has he been briefed on the mission parameters?" "Basic overview only. The details are classified until the full briefing." Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Stone. The sergeant was watching him with an expression that bordered on concern, which was unusual. Stone had seen Marcus face down situations that would have broken lesser men without showing a flicker of emotion. The fact that he was showing concern now said something about how unusual this situation was. "Get some sleep, Sergeant. It is going to be a long 3 days." Stone nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Commander, for what it is worth, the kid seems solid. Top of his BODAS class, excellent marks across the board. If anyone is ready for their first real operation, it is him." Marcus said nothing. Stone took the silence as dismissal and left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone again, Marcus picked up the photograph of himself and Coyote. He studied the faces of 2 young men who had no idea what was coming, who believed that skill and training and brotherhood would be enough to protect them from the randomness of war. He thought about Jake Sullivan dying in the sand with a bullet through his temple, calling Marcus's name with his last breath. He thought about all the young men he had trained over the decades, the ones who had come home in body bags and the ones who had come home as shadows of who they used to be. And now his own grandson was walking into that same fire. The dawn came slowly to the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed almost violent in their intensity. Marcus had not slept. He had spent the remaining hours reviewing intelligence reports, studying satellite imagery of the border corridor, committing every detail to memory with the obsessive thoroughness that had kept him alive for 45 years. The briefing room was already full when he arrived at 0545. 6 operators from SEAL Team 7, handpicked for this mission based on their skills and their ability to follow orders without question. They stood when Marcus entered, a gesture of respect that had become automatic over the years. His eyes found Ethan immediately. The boy was standing near the back, trying not to look nervous and failing. He had the Cole family features, strong jaw and sharp blue eyes, but there was a softness around the edges that combat had not yet burned away. His gear was new, his boots barely scuffed, everything about him screaming that he had never killed a man or watched a friend die. Marcus felt the weight of 45 years settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. This was his blood, his legacy, standing in a room full of killers waiting to be told how to wage war. He took his position at the front of the room, next to the tactical display that showed a three-dimensional map of the target area. The conversation died instantly. Listen carefully because I will only say this once. His voice carried the authority of 4 decades in uniform, quiet but impossible to ignore. The operators leaned forward slightly, instinctively drawn toward the source of command. Intelligence has identified a significant threat along the southern border corridor. Over the past 6 weeks, we have lost 4 Border Patrol agents to precision rifle fire. The shots were taken from elevated positions at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. This is not cartel violence. This is professional military operation. He touched the display and a satellite image appeared, showing a narrow valley system flanked by steep ridges. Terrain analysis suggests the shooters are using classic Soviet-era tactics. Elevated firing positions, overlapping fields of fire, pre-planned escape routes. Someone with serious training is running this operation. Marcus paused, letting the information settle. He could see the operators processing, calculating, already thinking about angles of approach and counter-sniper protocols. Our mission is reconnaissance. 3 days in the field, observing and documenting enemy movement patterns. Rules of engagement are defensive only unless I say otherwise. We go in quiet, we gather intelligence, and we come home with all the pieces we started with. A hand went up near the back of the room, Ethan's hand. Sir, what do we know about enemy strength? Marcus met his grandson's eyes across the room. The boy was trying to sound professional, but there was an eagerness beneath the surface that Marcus recognized. He had felt that same eagerness once, before he understood what combat actually cost. Current estimate is 8 to 12 shooters, operating in rotating shifts to maintain constant coverage of the valley approaches. They have demonstrated excellent fire discipline and professional-level marksmanship. Do not underestimate them. The door opened before Marcus could continue. Every head turned toward the interruption, hands instinctively moving toward weapons before training took over. A woman stood in the doorway. She was not impressive at first glance. 5'6" in boots that looked borrowed, dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, body armor that hung slightly loose on her frame, the way gear always did when it came from a supply cage instead of being custom fitted. She carried a weathered case that might have contained surveying equipment or technical instruments, the kind of generic container that no one would look at twice. But Marcus looked twice. He looked 3 times. Because the woman moved like water flowing around stones. Economical and precise, every step calculated for minimum noise and maximum efficiency. She swept the room once as she entered, her gray-blue eyes cataloging faces and exits and potential threats in a single fluid motion. Then she settled into an expression of careful neutrality and took a seat against the wall without waiting for invitation. The entire sequence took perhaps 5 seconds. It was the most forgettable entrance Marcus had ever witnessed, which was exactly what made alarm bells start screaming in the back of his mind. "Gentlemen," he said, keeping his voice level, "this is our attached specialist, Department of Defense terrain analyst, here to provide assessment of enemy movement patterns." He did not mention her name. He had not been given one. The orders that came down from SOCOM simply referred to her as technical consultant, which was the kind of vague designation that usually meant someone had secrets to protect. Stone caught Marcus's eye from across the room. The sergeant had noticed it too. The way the woman sat without fidgeting. The controlled rhythm of her breathing. The absolute stillness of her hands. These were not the behaviors of a desk analyst dropped into a room full of armed operators. These were the behaviors of someone who had done this before, many times, in places that probably did not exist on any map. Marcus continued the briefing, walking through insertion protocols and communication procedures and the 1,000 small details that separated successful operations from disasters. But part of his attention remained fixed on the woman against the wall. She did not take notes. She did not ask questions. She simply sat there with her hands folded in her lap, absorbing information like a sponge absorbing water. Her eyes tracked the tactical display with the focus of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at, who could read terrain features and calculate firing solutions and predict enemy movement patterns. When the briefing concluded, the operators filed out to prepare their gear. Marcus watched them go, noting the way Ethan paused at the door to look back at him. The boy wanted to say something, wanted some acknowledgement of their relationship, some sign that his grandfather saw him as more than just another body in the unit. But Marcus gave him nothing, and after a moment, Ethan turned and followed the others. The woman remained seated. Marcus approached her position, stopping at a distance that was respectful but not intimate. "I did not catch your name." "Elena Ashford." Her voice was flat, controlled, revealing nothing. She stood in a single fluid motion, collecting her case. "I believe you have some questions, Commander Cole." The use of his name confirmed his suspicions. She had done her homework. She knew who he was, what he had accomplished, probably details about his career that were supposed to be buried under classification stamps that even generals could not access. Marcus studied her face, looking for something familiar. The scar above her left eyebrow, the slight asymmetry of her features, the way her weight was distributed, balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction at a moment's notice. "You were trained in shadow operations," he said quietly. "Tier 1 assets. Your movement patterns follow Protocol 7, which I personally developed for operators who work alone behind enemy lines." Elena's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps? Or recognition. "You wrote Protocol 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. The material is still classified above top secret, distributed only to certain units that officially do not exist. The fact that you were trained in those techniques tells me several things about your background." Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its careful neutrality. "Shadow Talons. 3 years active, 2 years reserve status. Current classification is inactive, but certain obligations remain." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. Shadow Talons was the unit that the government used when regular special forces were too blunt an instrument. Surgeons who operated in darkness, eliminating threats that could never be acknowledged. He had helped design their training curriculum decades ago, had written the protocols that shaped how they thought and moved and killed. This woman was one of his students in a sense. She had been forged by techniques he had developed, shaped by doctrines he had created, and yet she had clearly evolved beyond those original teachings, refined them into something colder and more precise. "Why are you really here, Miss Ashford?" Elena met his gaze directly. "Because someone you know is running the operation we are about to investigate. Someone who taught me before your protocols were implemented. Someone I believe you have been hunting for 35 years." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt his hand move involuntarily toward the pistol at his hip, the old familiar weight that had been his constant companion since 1975. "Victor Kessler." Elena nodded once. "He is alive, and he is here." The name opened a door that Marcus had kept locked for 3.5 decades. Victor Kessler, his brother-in-arms from the jungles of Southeast Asia. The man who had saved his life when a mortar round fell too close, who had dragged him through mud and blood and chaos to reach the medevac helicopter. They had sworn oaths to each other in the darkness, the kind of promises that young men make when they believe they are invincible. And then Kessler had disappeared. Panama, 1989. $3 million in operational funds vanished along with him. The official report listed him as killed in action, body unrecovered. But Marcus had never believed it. He recognized Kessler's signature in too many unexplained events over the following decades. Assassinations that seemed impossible. Operations that bore the stamp of training only a handful of people in the world possessed. The ghost broker, the intelligence community called him. A shadow who sold death to the highest bidder. A legend that Marcus had spent 35 years trying to track down. "How do you know it is him?" Elena reached into her case and withdrew a tablet. She powered it on and handed it to Marcus. The screen showed satellite imagery of the border valley with several positions marked in red. "These firing positions follow a pattern I was taught during my training. Kessler developed the original doctrine before your protocols replaced it. But he always included certain signatures, small details that identified his work to anyone who knew what to look for. Call it professional vanity. He wanted people to know it was him, even if they could never prove it." Marcus studied the imagery. The positions were arranged in a configuration he had not seen in decades, a variation on Soviet tactical doctrine that Kessler had modified during their time in Berlin. The angles were wrong for standard ambush procedure, but they were perfect for a specific kind of operation that Marcus had helped develop back when he and Kessler were young and the world was divided into simple categories of enemy and ally. It was a kill box, not designed to engage random targets, but to channel a specific response into a predetermined zone where every advantage belonged to the attackers. "This is a trap," Marcus said quietly. "He is not hunting border agents. He is hunting us." Elena nodded. "He knows you will come. He has been waiting for this opportunity for 35 years. The cartel operation is just cover. This is personal." Marcus handed back the tablet, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. Kessler knew him better than almost anyone alive. They had trained together, fought together, bled together. If this was truly a trap designed specifically to kill Marcus Cole, then it would be sophisticated and brutal and nearly impossible to escape. "Why tell me this? Why not just let me walk into the ambush?" "Because Kessler also trained me." Elena's voice hardened slightly. "And I have my own reasons for wanting him stopped." Marcus recognized this tone. It was the sound of someone carrying a burden they could not set down, a weight that shaped every decision and colored every interaction. He knew that sound intimately. He heard it in his own voice every time he spoke about Coyote. "What did he take from you?" Elena was silent for a long moment. When she answered, the words came slowly, like water dripping from a stone. "His protocols had flaws built into them. Kill switches, he called them, ways to neutralize any operator trained in his methods. I discovered one of those flaws during a mission in Bulgaria. It cost me my spotter, a 26-year-old kid named Danny Morrison who wanted to open a restaurant when he got out." The parallel was not lost on Marcus. Two soldiers, two generations apart, both haunted by the deaths of men they had failed to protect. Both carrying guilt that no amount of time or achievement could erase. "How did you survive?" "I evolved. I found the flaws in his training, and I eliminated them from my own practice. I became something he did not anticipate, but he does not know that yet. He still thinks I am vulnerable to his techniques." Marcus considered the implications. If Elena was telling the truth, she represented something unprecedented. A weapon forged in Kessler's methods but refined beyond his control. An operator who could predict his movements because she understood his doctrine, but who had grown past the limitations he had designed into his students. "You want to use this mission to draw him out. I want to end him." Elena's voice was cold now, the temperature of surgical steel. "He has spent 35 years selling death to anyone who could pay. He has trained terrorists and assassins and the private armies of dictators. The things he has done, the people he has killed, it has to stop." Marcus thought about his grandson, 19 years old and sleeping in the barracks 100 meters away. He thought about the photograph on his desk, two young men smiling before a war that would claim one of them. He thought about Kessler, somewhere in those mountains, waiting with the patience of a spider who had spent 3 decades building the perfect web. This operation just got significantly more complicated. Elena almost smiled. "That is why they sent me, Commander, because simple operations do not require people like us." The sun was fully up now, pouring golden light through the windows of the briefing room. In a few hours, helicopters would carry them into the desert, into terrain that Kessler had probably been studying for months. Every advantage would belong to the enemy. Every standard tactical approach would be anticipated and countered. Marcus realized that he was facing the most dangerous mission of his career, at an age when most men were worried about cholesterol level and prostate exams. He was going into battle against an enemy who knew him better than anyone alive, with a grandson who had never seen real combat and a mysterious operator whose true loyalties remained unclear. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Coyote's ghost whispered the same words it had been whispering for 33 years. "Watch the high ground, Marcus. Always watch the high ground." He made his decision in the space of a single heartbeat. We briefed the team on the updated threat assessment. Full disclosure. If Kessler is out there, my people need to know what they are walking into. Elena raised an eyebrow. "That will compromise operational security. If anyone leaks the information..." "My people do not leak." Marcus's voice carried absolute certainty. "They have bled for each other. They have killed for each other. They deserve to know that this mission is personal." "And your grandson?" The question cut deeper than Elena probably intended. Marcus thought about Ethan, about the eagerness in the boy's eyes, about 3 generations of Coal warriors stretching back through history like a chain of blood and duty. My grandson will be told the same as everyone else. No special treatment, no protection he has not earned. If he is going to be a warrior, he needs to understand that war does not care about family connections. Elena studied him for a long moment, something like respect flickering in her gray-blue eyes. You really wrote Protocol 7? Every word. Based on techniques I learned in places I still cannot talk about. Based on lessons paid for in blood by men like Jake Sullivan, who died because I was too focused on the primary target to see the counter-sniper repositioning. The admission surprised him. He had not spoken Coyote's name to anyone in years, had not acknowledged the guilt that he carried like a stone in his chest. But something about Elena's presence, her own burden of loss and failure, made the words come easier. Sullivan was your spotter. Marcus nodded. Best marksman I ever worked with. He could read wind patterns like poetry. He could calculate distances by instinct alone. And I let him die because I had tunnel vision. Because I was so locked onto my target that I forgot the first rule of sniper operations. Which is, the shot is never more important than your team. You can always find another target. You cannot replace the man watching your back. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost its professional detachment. Hawk, Danny Morrison, he told me the same thing once. He said I was the best shooter he had ever worked with, but I was missing something important, a reason to stay alive. He said people who do not fear death usually end up dead because they take risks that survivors would not take. And then he died. 2 days later, counter-sniper I should have seen. Same situation you described. Tunnel vision. Focus so tight on the primary target that the secondary threat became invisible. Marcus looked at Elena and saw himself reflected back, distorted by 33 years, but recognizable nonetheless. 2 killers from different generations, shaped by the same training, broken by the same kind of loss, carrying the same weight of guilt and responsibility. Kessler trained both of us in a sense. Yes, and now we are going to hunt him together. Elena met his eyes, unless he hunts us first. The clock on the wall showed Bureau 800. In 30 minutes, helicopters would begin their approach. In an hour, they would be in the air, flying toward whatever Kessler had prepared for them in those mountains. Marcus thought about his pistol, sitting on the desk in his office. He thought about Coyote's photograph, the smiling face of a man who had trusted him completely. He thought about Ethan, his grandson, who carried the Cole legacy in his blood without understanding what that legacy truly cost. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a door that had been closed for 35 years began to creak open. Behind it waited Victor Kessler, the brother who had become an enemy, the friend who had chosen betrayal. The hunt was about to begin, but Marcus Cole was no longer certain who was the hunter and who was the prey. He looked at Elena one final time, this woman who had appeared from nowhere carrying secrets and skills and a grudge that mirrored his own. Whatever happens out there, he said quietly, we bring everyone home. That is not negotiable. Elena nodded once, a gesture of acceptance that carried more weight than any verbal agreement. Protocol 7, Section 4. Mission success is meaningless if your team does not survive to complete the next one. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. You learned well. I had good teachers. Some of them were even alive long enough to see the results. The joke was dark, the kind of humor that only people who had lived in shadows could appreciate. Marcus found himself warming to this strange woman, this killer who quoted his own words back to him. This ghost who had emerged from darkness to help him face the enemy he had been hunting for half a lifetime. Outside the window, the desert waited, patient, eternal, ready to swallow more secrets, more bones, more ghosts. Marcus Cole straightened his shoulders and prepared to walk into the fire one more time. Because old soldiers did not retire. They just found new wars to fight, new enemies to face, new reasons to keep moving forward when every fiber of their being screamed for rest. And this war, this enemy, this reason, might be the last one that mattered. The equipment bay was a controlled chaos of activity when Marcus arrived. Operators moved between lockers and benches with the practiced efficiency of professionals preparing for war, checking weapons and testing communications gear, and loading magazines with rounds that could end a human life at distances most people could not even imagine. The smell of gun oil and sweat hung in the air like incense in a church dedicated to violence. Marcus found Ethan near the far wall, struggling with a strap on his tactical vest. The boy's fingers were trembling slightly, a detail that no one else would notice, but that screamed volumes to someone who had trained thousands of young warriors over 4 decades. He crossed the room and stopped beside his grandson. Up close, the family resemblance was even more striking. The same jawline, the same blue eyes, even the same way of standing with weight slightly forward, ready to move in any direction. Looking at Ethan was like looking into a mirror that showed Marcus himself 46 years younger, before the wars and the losses and the weight of too many hard choices. That strap goes over the shoulder, not under. Ethan looked up, surprise flickering across his features before training took over, and he smoothed his expression into professional neutrality. "Sir, thank you, sir." Marcus reached out and adjusted the strap with hands that still remembered every detail of gear configuration, even if they were not as steady as they used to be. His fingers brushed against the ceramic plate of the body armor, checking its position by instinct. "Your father did not want you on this mission." The words came out before Marcus could stop them. Ethan stiffened slightly but did not look away. "I know, sir. He made that very clear. But you pushed for the assignment anyway." "Yes, sir, I did." "Why?" Ethan was silent for a moment, and Marcus watched the boy's face as he struggled to find words for something that probably defied easy explanation. Finally, he spoke. "Because you are the best, sir. Everyone knows it. The Phantom of Ramadi, the ghost of the DMZ. You have done things that other operators only read about in classified briefings. I thought if I was going to learn how to do this job, really learn it, I should learn from someone who has actually done it at the highest level." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Pride, perhaps? Or fear? The two emotions were so tangled together that he could no longer separate them. "This is not a training exercise, Petty Officer Cole. People will be shooting at us with real bullets. People might die. The men we are going against have killed before, and they will not hesitate to kill again." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Marcus's voice hardened slightly. "Have you ever seen a man die? Not in training videos or simulation exercises. Actually watch the life leave someone's eyes while blood pumped out of holes that used to be intact flesh?" Ethan swallowed hard but held his grandfather's gaze. "No, sir, I have not." "Then you do not understand. Not really, but you will. If you survive this mission, you will understand things that no amount of training can prepare you for. You will learn what it feels like to take a life, to carry that weight with you for the rest of your days. You will discover parts of yourself that you did not know existed, and some of them will be very dark indeed." The boy's face had gone pale, but he did not look away. That kind of courage in the face of hard truth was another Cole family trait, inherited through blood and example. "Is it worth it, sir?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Everything you have seen, everything you have done, was it worth the cost?" Marcus considered the question carefully. He thought about Coyote, dying in the sand with a bullet through his temple. He thought about the 17 men he had killed with his own hands, each one leaving a mark on his soul that time could not erase. He thought about the decades of service, the missions that went wrong, the friends who came home in boxes or not at all. "Ask me again when this is over. If we are both still alive, I will give you an honest answer." Ethan nodded slowly. "Thank you for that, sir, for not lying to me. I do not lie to my people." Marcus stepped back, his adjustments to the tactical vest complete. "You wanted to learn from the best." Lesson 1 is that truth matters more than comfort. In combat, comfortable lies get people killed. Hard truths keep them alive. He turned and walked away before Ethan could respond, before the emotions building in his chest could find their way to his face. Behind him, he could feel his grandson's eyes following him across the equipment bay, watching, learning, trying to understand the man who was both family and legend. The helicopter pad was already warming under the morning sun when the team assembled. 2 Blackhawks sat with rotors turning, their engines producing that distinctive whine that Marcus had heard 1,000 times before insertions. The sound was like a heartbeat, steady and relentless, counting down the seconds until they crossed into hostile territory. Elena Ashford stood apart from the group, her equipment case strapped to her back, her face unreadable behind tactical sunglasses. She looked like any other contractor, anonymous and forgettable, which was precisely the point. But Marcus noticed that she had positioned herself with clear lines of sight to every member of the team, cataloging their movements and behaviors the way a predator catalogs potential prey. Sean Murphy, the team medic, was running final checks on his medical equipment. At 35, Murphy was old for an operator, carrying himself with the quiet competence of someone who had seen the worst that combat could do to human bodies. Derek Stone approached Marcus as the team performed final equipment checks. "Commander, I ran the additional background you requested on our specialist." "And?" Stone lowered his voice. "Most of her file is black, redacted beyond anything I have clearance for. But I found one entry that was not completely sanitized. A mission designation from Bulgaria, dated 2020. Something called Operation Nightfall." Marcus filed the information away. He would ask Elena about it later when there was time for answers. For now, the helicopters were waiting and the desert was not getting any cooler. "Load up. We lift in 5 mics." The team moved with practiced efficiency, climbing into the aircraft and settling into positions that balanced weight distribution and allowed quick egress if necessary. Marcus took a seat near the door, where he could observe both the interior of the aircraft and the terrain passing below. Elena settled across from him, her case secured between her feet. Their eyes met briefly, two professionals acknowledging each other across the cramped space of the helicopter cabin. Ethan sat near the back, between Murphy and Stone. The medic was talking to him quietly, probably offering advice or reassurance, or simply distraction from the nerves that every young operator felt before their first real mission. Stone watched the exchange with the detached attention of a veteran who had seen too many first missions go wrong. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Lifting in 30 seconds. Flight time to LZ is approximately 45 minutes. Weather is clear, winds minimal. Should be a smooth ride." Marcus looked out the window at the desert stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere in those mountains, Victor Kessler was waiting. A man he had called brother. A man he had trusted with his life. A man who had betrayed everything they had believed in together, who had sold his skills and his conscience to the highest bidder for 35 years. The memories of their time together came without invitation. Training at Fort Bragg, pushing each other to excel. Fighting in places the history books would never mention. There had been a time when Marcus would have died for Victor Kessler without hesitation. And then Panama had happened. The betrayal. The 35 years of wondering whether the friend he had known had ever really existed. The helicopters lifted off, their rotors beating the air into submission as they climbed above the base and turned toward the mountains. Below, forward operating base Sentinel shrank until it was just another collection of shapes on the brown desert floor. Marcus thought about all the insertions he had done. The jungles of Southeast Asia, the frozen wastelands along the DMZ, the burning oil fields of Kuwait. Each one had been a step into the unknown. But this one felt different. This was personal. He looked at Ethan, sitting near the back of the cabin with the nervous energy of youth barely contained beneath a mask of professional calm. He looked at Elena, still and composed, her breathing steady and controlled as she prepared herself mentally for whatever lay ahead. The desert below was endless, a sea of brown and gold stretching to horizons that shimmered with heat. Somewhere in that vastness, death waited with the patience of a spider in its web. Marcus Cole had spent 68 years preparing for this moment. He only hoped it would be enough. The helicopter banked left, following the terrain toward the mountains where Kessler had built his trap. The engines droned steadily, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the minutes until contact. And in the back of Marcus's mind, Coyote's ghost whispered the same warning it had been whispering for 33 years. "Watch the high ground, brother. Always watch the high ground." This time, Marcus intended to listen. Because old soldiers never died. They just found one last battle worth fighting, one last enemy worth destroying, one last chance to make right the things that had gone wrong so many years ago. And Victor Kessler, the brother who became an enemy, was about to learn that some ghosts could not be outrun, no matter how many years you tried to hide in the shadows. The mountains grew larger through the helicopter's windows, rising from the desert like ancient sentinels guarding secrets that men had killed for since the dawn of civilization. Marcus checked his pistol one final time, the familiar weight of the 1911 settling into his palm like an old friend. Whatever happened in the next 72 hours, one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. And somewhere in those mountains, Victor Kessler was watching the helicopters approach, a smile playing across features that had aged but never softened. The trap was set, the prey was coming, and only one of them would walk away. The helicopter descended through air that tasted like copper and dust, rotors churning the morning heat into a vortex that whipped sand against the windows like tiny hammers. Marcus Cole watched the landing zone approach through eyes that had seen 1,000 similar insertions, each one carrying the potential for glory or catastrophe or something in between that the textbooks never prepared you for. The Arizona desert stretched out below them like a canvas painted in shades of brown and gold, broken only by the jagged lines of mountain ridges that rose from the earth like the bones of ancient giants. Beautiful country, in its harsh and unforgiving way, the kind of landscape that revealed what a man was made of, whether he wanted to know or not. Across the cabin, Elena Ashford sat with the stillness of a statue carved from stone. Her eyes were closed, but Marcus knew she was not sleeping. Her breathing was too controlled, too rhythmic, the deliberate pattern of someone preparing their mind and body for violence. He had written the technique into Protocol 7, Section 3, Subsection 4, Meditation for Combat Readiness. He had never expected to see it performed so perfectly by someone he had never trained directly. The irony was not lost on him. Somewhere in the chain of instruction that connected her training to his doctrine, something extraordinary had happened. Elena Ashford had taken his teachings and refined them into something sharper, colder, more precise than anything he had imagined when he put pen to paper 3 decades ago. Ethan sat 2 seats away, his young face trying to maintain the professional calm expected of a Navy SEAL, while his fingers betrayed him with their constant small movements. Checking his rifle, adjusting his vest, touching the extra magazines on his chest rig, the nervous habits of a warrior who had never killed a man, who did not yet understand that all the training in the world could not prepare you for the moment when you looked through your sights and saw a human being instead of a paper target. Marcus remembered that feeling. Half a lifetime ago in a jungle that smelled of rot and rain, in the particular musk of fear, he had learned what it meant to take a life. The weight of that first kill had never left him. It had simply been joined by others, stacked one upon another until the burden became something he carried without conscious thought. The way a man carries the scars of old wounds that no longer bleed but never truly heal. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. 2 minutes to touchdown. LZ appears clear. No visible movement on the perimeter. Marcus caught Derek Stone's eye across the cabin. The sergeant gave a slight nod, acknowledging the information without comment. Stone had been doing this long enough to know that clear landing zones meant nothing. The most dangerous insertions were often the ones that looked the safest, because a smart enemy knew how to hide until the moment of maximum vulnerability. And Victor Kessler was a very smart enemy. The helicopters flared hard, rotors screaming as they fought against gravity and forward momentum. Marcus felt his stomach lurch as the aircraft dropped the final 20 feet in a controlled fall that was more art than science. Then the skids hit Earth, and the doors were sliding open, and the team was pouring out into the chaos of rotor wash and dust. Marcus moved on automatic, his body remembering movements that his mind no longer had to direct. Rifle up, scanning sectors, feet finding solid ground through the swirling sand. Around him, the other operators spread out in a defensive perimeter, each man covering a designated arc. The choreography of combat that looked random to civilians, but was actually more precise than any ballet. The helicopters lifted off immediately, their job done, leaving the team alone in a landscape that seemed to swallow sound. The silence rushed in like a living thing, filling the space where the rotors had been, pressing against eardrums that were still ringing from the noise. Marcus held his position, waiting, watching. His eyes swept the ridgelines that surrounded the valley, looking for the telltale glint of glass or the subtle wrongness of a shape that did not belong to the natural terrain. Nothing moved except the wind, which carried dust in small spirals that danced across the hard-packed earth. Perimeter secure. Stone's voice was quiet, professional, no contacts visible. Marcus nodded, but something in his gut was screaming a warning that his conscious mind had not yet processed. The landing zone was too clean, too quiet, too perfect. After 45 years of combat operations, he had learned to trust the instincts that operated below the level of rational thought. Move out. Tactical formation. I want eyes on every ridge before we advance. The team shifted into a diamond pattern, spreading across the valley floor with the fluid efficiency of professionals who had worked together long enough to anticipate each other's movements. Marcus took point because that was where commanders belonged when the situation felt wrong. Leading from the front, sharing the risk, earning the respect that could not be demanded through rank alone. Elena fell into position beside him, her equipment case now strapped to her back in a configuration that allowed quick access. Her eyes never stopped moving, scanning the terrain with an intensity that matched his own. Whatever else she was, Marcus thought, She was a professional. She understood that the desert held secrets, and those secrets could kill you if you stopped paying attention. They covered 200 meters before the first sign of trouble appeared. Marcus saw it before anyone else, because he had been looking for exactly this configuration. A slight disturbance in the soil near a cluster of rocks. The kind of disturbance that could have been caused by an animal, or the wind, or 1,000 other natural phenomena. But the shape was wrong, too geometric, too deliberate. Halt! The single word froze the entire team in place. Marcus dropped to one knee, his rifle trained on the suspicious area, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. What is it? Stone asked quietly, moving up to Marcus's position. Pressure plate, buried about 2 inches deep, connected to something larger underneath. Soviet design, if I am reading the trigger mechanism correctly. Same model they used in Afghanistan in the 80s. Stone's face went pale beneath his tan. That is 40-year-old technology. Who the hell is using Cold War-era ordnance? Marcus did not answer because the answer was too terrible to speak aloud. Kessler, Victor Kessler, who had learned his trade in the same era, who had helped design some of those very devices, who would appreciate the irony of using weapons from their shared past to destroy his former brother-in-arms. Mark it and move around. Tell everyone to watch their footing. If there is one, there are probably more. The team adjusted their path, giving the buried device a wide berth. Marcus could feel the tension ratcheting up with every step, the invisible weight of danger pressing down on all of them. Somewhere in these mountains, Kessler was watching, waiting, playing a game that had started half a century ago and was finally reaching its endgame. The radio crackled to life. Marcus. The voice was like a ghost reaching out from the past. Older, rougher, weathered by decades of living in the shadows, but unmistakable. Marcus would have recognized that voice in a crowd of thousands, would have heard it in his nightmares for years to come. Victor, the single word carried 35 years of history, friendship, betrayal, the bonds that had been forged in blood and broken by choices that could never be taken back. You found my little welcome gift. I knew you would. You always were the careful one, Marcus, always thinking 3 moves ahead, trying to anticipate every threat. But that is your weakness, old friend. You spend so much time thinking about what might happen that you sometimes miss what is happening right in front of you. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Where are you, Victor? Closer than you think. Far enough to be safe. I have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. 35 years, in fact. Ever since Panama. Ever since you turned your back on everything we built together. I turned my back on nothing. You are the one who ran. You are the one who took the money and disappeared. You are the one who sold your soul to the highest bidder. Kessler's laugh crackled through the radio, a sound that held no warmth or humor. Sold my soul? That is rich, coming from you. We were both killers, Marcus. We are still both killers. The only difference is that I stopped pretending to be something else. I stopped hiding behind flags and duty and the comfortable lies that let men like us sleep at night. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the wind and the distant cry of a bird. Then Kessler spoke again, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. I know about the woman, Elena Ashford, Shadow Talon's inactive status, 187 confirmed kills across 4 continents. I trained her predecessors, you know. Wrote the original protocols that she was taught before your revisions replaced mine. She is impressive, perhaps the most talented operator I have ever encountered. But she has a flaw, Marcus. The same flaw you have. The same flaw that got Jake Sullivan killed in Kuwait. Do not speak his name. Coyote. That was what you called him, yes? Because of the way he could howl after too many beers. I remember him. Good man. Excellent spotter. Dead because you developed tunnel vision at exactly the wrong moment. Dead because you were so focused on your target that you forgot to watch the high ground. Marcus felt the old wound tearing open in his chest, the scar tissue that had never fully healed suddenly burning with fresh pain. His hand tightened on his rifle, knuckles going white. What do you want, Victor? I want what I have always wanted. To prove that I am better than you. To show the world that Victor Kessler was never the second best sniper in our unit, despite what all the reports said. To finish the competition that started 50 years ago, when we were both young and stupid enough to think that killing was a game with winners and losers. This is not a game. People are going to die. People are always dying, Marcus. The question is whether their deaths mean anything. Today, the deaths will mean something. Today, we find out once and for all which one of us deserves to be called the best. The radio went silent. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, processing the implications. This was not a cartel operation. This was not about drugs or territory or money. This was personal. A vendetta that had been building for 3.5 decades, finally reaching its explosive conclusion in the Arizona desert. Commander, Stone's voice cut through his thoughts. We have movement on the eastern ridge. Marcus raised his binoculars, scanning the area Stone had indicated. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the rocks that made it difficult to distinguish natural formations from human positions. But there, a shape that did not belong, a rifle barrel extending from behind a boulder, catching a brief glint of light before disappearing again. Contact. Eastern ridge, approximately 800 meters. I count one shooter, possibly more in concealment. The words had barely left his mouth when the first shot cracked across the valley. The bullet whipped past Murphy's head close enough to ruffle his hair, the supersonic snap arriving a fraction of a second before the sound of the shot itself. The medic dropped flat without thinking, years of training overriding conscious thought, his body reacting to danger before his mind had time to process what was happening. "Cover!" Marcus shouted, but the command was unnecessary. The team was already moving, each man finding whatever protection the terrain offered, weapons coming up to return fire even though the enemy positions were not yet fully identified. More shots rang out. Not the wild spray of untrained shooters, but measured, deliberate fire from multiple positions. Marcus counted the reports, triangulating in his mind, building a picture of the ambush that was unfolding around them. 10 shooters, maybe 12, positioned in an overlapping pattern that covered every approach to the valley floor. Professional placement, professional fire discipline, exactly the configuration that Kessler had developed during their time in Berlin, when they had hunted Soviet operatives in the shadow of the wall. The kill box closed around them like a fist. Marcus found cover behind a cluster of rocks that provided minimal protection, but at least blocked the direct line of fire from the eastern ridge. His mind was racing, calculating angles and distances, looking for the weakness in the enemy formation that every tactical setup possessed. Stone slid into position beside him, breathing hard. "Commander, we are pinned. They have the high ground on 3 sides. Standard egress routes are covered." "I know. Hold position, wait for them to make a mistake." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew they were hollow. Kessler did not make mistakes, not tactical ones anyway. Whatever flaws the man possessed, incompetence was not among them. The gunfire continued, a steady rhythm of suppression that kept the team locked in place. Not shooting to kill, Marcus realized. Shooting to contain. They wanted the SEAL team alive, at least for now, which meant this was not about elimination. This was about something else. His eyes found Elena across the chaos of the firefight. She had taken cover behind a low rise, her body pressed flat against the earth, her face calm despite the bullets snapping overhead. Her equipment case was open beside her, and in her hands was something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. An M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, custom modified with a suppressor that looked hand-machined and a scope that probably cost more than most people's cars. The weapon of a professional killer, maintained with the obsessive care that only operators understood. Elena caught his gaze across the distance. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement that words could not capture. She knew what he was thinking. She knew that he had recognized her the moment she walked into the briefing room. And now, with bullets flying and death surrounding them, the pretense was finally over. "You are Shadow Talons," Marcus called out, his voice carrying despite the gunfire. "Was." Elena's response was flat, professional. "Inactive status. I do not work for them anymore." "But you kept the rifle. Some tools are worth keeping." She rolled into a shooting position with the fluid grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Her eye went to the scope, her finger to the trigger guard, her body settling into the stance that Marcus had described in Protocol 7. Except she had modified it, refined it, evolved it into something more efficient than he had ever imagined. "I count 10 shooters," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Eastern Ridge has 4. Northern Approach has 3. Western Flank has 3 more. Standard Soviet containment pattern, modified for terrain." "I know the pattern. I helped develop it." "Then you know there is a weakness, the Southern Approach. They left it open intentionally, trying to channel any retreat into a secondary kill zone." Marcus nodded. which means that is exactly where we cannot go. Agreed, she paused, making small adjustments to her scope. I can take the eastern shooters, but I need time, 15 minutes. Maybe less if they cooperate. 15 minutes is an eternity in a firefight. Then give me something to work with. Marcus made his decision in a single heartbeat. He turned to Stone, who was still pressed against the rocks beside him. I need a distraction, something to keep them focused on this position while our specialist goes to work. Stone's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on grim determination. What kind of distraction? The loud kind. 5 minutes later, Marcus was crawling through the rocks toward a position that would put him in direct line of sight to at least 3 enemy shooters. His rifle felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it had in years. Not because of the weight of the weapon itself, but because of the weight of what he was about to do. 68 years old, the thought kept repeating in his mind like a drumbeat. His eyes were not as sharp as they used to be. His hands trembled slightly when he held them still for too long. His breathing was not as controlled as it had been in his prime, the product of lungs that had inhaled too much smoke and dust over too many decades. But experience did not age. Knowledge did not fade. The instincts that had kept him alive through 4 decades of combat were still there, buried deep in the neural pathways that combat had carved into his brain. He reached his position and settled into a prone stance, his scope sweeping across the eastern ridge. The enemy shooters were good, but they were not perfect. One of them had shifted slightly, exposing a sliver of shoulder beyond his cover. Amateur mistake, the kind of error that young shooters made when they had been in position too long and their muscles started to cramp. Marcus calculated the distance, 700 meters, accounting for elevation, wind, temperature, the curvature of the earth at this range. All the variables that turn marksmanship into mathematics, that reduce the act of killing to an equation with only one solution. His finger found the trigger. Breathe, exhale, pause. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, the report echoing across the valley. 700 meters away, the exposed shoulder jerked and disappeared. Not a kill shot, but enough to take one shooter out of the fight. The response was immediate. Multiple muzzle flashes from the ridgeline, bullets cracking through the air around his position. Marcus was already moving, rolling to his right, finding new cover before the enemy could adjust their aim. The rocks behind him erupted in a spray of fragments as rounds tore into the stone. But the distraction had worked. Elena's rifle spoke from somewhere to his left. The suppressed shot was barely audible over the din of the enemy fire, a soft cough that sounded almost gentle compared to the crack and thunder of unsuppressed weapons. But the effect was not gentle at all. One of the shooters on the eastern ridge slumped forward over his weapon, the top of his head simply gone. The others had not even registered the loss when Elena fired again, and again, and again. Marcus watched through his scope as she worked, and what he saw took his breath away. She was not just good, she was transcendent. Each shot was placed with impossible precision, finding gaps in cover that should not have existed, exploiting microseconds of exposure that no normal human eye should have been able to track. Her rate of fire was measured, methodical, each round fired exactly when it would have maximum effect. In the space of 4 minutes, she eliminated 6 shooters on the eastern ridge. The remaining positions went silent, either dead or too terrified to expose themselves. Marcus shifted his attention to the northern approach. 3 shooters there, professional but rattled now. They had expected to be the hunters, not the hunted. The shift in dynamics had thrown them off their rhythm. He took aim at the closest position and fired. The shot went wide, missing by inches. His hands were shaking. Damn them. The tremor that came from age and exhaustion making precision work nearly impossible. In his prime, that shot would have been lethal. Now it was merely a warning, a statement of intent without the execution to back it up. But the miss served its purpose. The enemy shooter flinched, adjusting his position instinctively. And in that moment of movement, Elena's rifle spoke again from across the valley. The shooter dropped and did not move. 2 more followed in rapid succession, Elena's bullets finding their marks with the cold efficiency of a machine. But machines did not breathe. Machines did not calculate. Machines did not carry the weight of 187 kills on their conscience. Elena Ashford was something more than a machine. She was a weapon that had learned to think, to feel, to choose. And right now, she was choosing to protect 8 American lives by taking others. The valley fell silent except for the wind. Marcus lay in his position for a long moment, listening for the sounds of continued threat. Nothing. Only the whisper of dust across stone and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Clear on the east, Elena's voice came through the radio. Clear on the north, Stone confirmed. Western positions are empty. They withdrew. Murphy's voice was shaky, the adrenaline of near death still coursing through his system. Marcus pushed himself to his feet, his body protesting the movement. Every joint ached, every muscle screamed. He was too old for this, had been too old for years, but the mission did not care about age. The mission only cared about completion. He made his way toward Elena's position, navigating the rocks and debris with careful steps. She was already breaking down her rifle, stowing the components in her case with the same economical movements that had characterized everything she did. That was impressive work. Elena did not look up. It was necessary. You saved lives today. I took lives today. Saving was a byproduct. The coldness in her voice should have disturbed him. Instead, it resonated with something deep in his own experience. He had felt that same distance, that same detachment, in the years after his first kills. The mind-building walls around the reality of what it had done, creating space between the act and the emotion that followed. You wrote Protocol 7. The words were a statement, not a question. Elena finally looked at him, her gray-blue eyes unreadable. And 8 and 9 and 10, I never thought they would still be in use. They are the foundation of everything Shadow Talons teaches. Every operator who comes through the program learns your methods, your techniques, your philosophy of combat. Marcus felt the weight of that knowledge settle onto his shoulders. Hundreds of operators, maybe thousands over the decades, had been shaped by words he had written in a different lifetime. Elena Ashford was one of them, the product of his doctrine filtered through years of refinement and evolution. Kessler's protocols came first, she continued. They were effective, but they were also flawed. He built in vulnerabilities, backdoors that he could exploit if any of his students ever turned against him. Your protocols replaced his because they were cleaner, more ethical. You designed them to create warriors, not weapons. The distinction matters. It matters to some of us. She closed her case and stood, slinging it over her shoulder. We need to move. Kessler will have a secondary force ready. This was just the opening move. Marcus nodded, but before he could give the order to move out, a new voice crackled through his radio, a voice that turned his blood to ice. Grandfather? Ethan. The word was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of every nightmare Marcus had ever had. His eyes swept the team, counting bodies, looking for the familiar shape of his grandson among the operators gathered in the valley. Ethan was not there. Where is Petty Officer Cole? Marcus demanded, his voice cutting through the post-battle silence. Stone's face went pale. He was on the western flank. I ordered him to hold position when the shooting started. Then where is he now? The answer came not from Stone, but from the radio. Victor Kessler's voice, smooth and satisfied, like a cat that had finally caught the mouse it had been chasing. He is with me, Marcus, your grandson, the third generation of Cole warriors. He looks just like you did at that age, you know. The same eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same foolish courage that makes young men think they can change the world. Marcus felt his heart stop. Actually stop, for one terrible moment that stretched into eternity. Then it resumed, pounding against his ribs like a caged animal trying to escape. If you hurt him, if I hurt him, what? You will kill me? You have been trying to do that for 35 years, old friend. The threat has lost its power through repetition. Kessler's voice shifted, becoming almost conversational. He came to help, you know. When the shooting started, he left his position and tried to flank the enemy. Brave, stupid, exactly what I was counting on. The Cole family has a genetic tendency toward heroic stupidity. It is quite reliable. What do you want? I told you what I want. A reckoning, a final confrontation between the two best snipers of our generation. Winner takes all, loser takes a bullet. And Ethan, consider him insurance, motivation, a reminder of what you are fighting for. Come to the coordinates I am sending to your secondary frequency. Come alone. We finished this the way it should have been finished 3.5 decades ago. The radio went silent. Marcus stood in the center of the valley, surrounded by the bodies of men who had died in a game they did not understand, holding a rifle that suddenly felt heavier than any weight he had ever carried. His grandson was in the hands of a man who had once been his closest friend and was now his deadliest enemy. The sun beat down without mercy. The wind carried dust and the smell of blood. And somewhere in the mountains ahead, Victor Kessler was waiting. Marcus looked at Elena, then at Stone, then at the rest of the team. 8 faces watching him, waiting for orders, trusting him to make the decision that would determine whether they lived or died. He thought about Ethan, 19 years old, full of the same fire that Marcus had carried at that age. He thought about James, his son, who would never forgive him if anything happened to the boy. He thought about Coyote, dead in the sand 33 years ago, and all the promises Marcus had made standing over his body. Never again, he had sworn. Never again would he let tunnel vision cost him someone he cared about. But this was not tunnel vision. This was the opposite. This was seeing too clearly, understanding too completely, knowing exactly what he had to do and hating himself for the choice he was about to make. I am going. Commander, Stone's voice was sharp with objection. That is exactly what he wants. It is a trap. Of course it is a trap, but my grandson is at the center of it. And Victor Kessler has made one very serious miscalculation. What is that? He thinks I am the same man I was 35 years ago. He thinks I will come alone, following the rules of engagement we learned together. He thinks this is about honor and competition and proving who is the better soldier. Marcus checked his rifle, verified his ammunition, and looked toward the mountains where Kessler waited. He does not know about Elena. He does not know that I have an operator who can match him shot for shot. He does not know that the protocols he taught have been replaced by protocols he has never seen. Elena stepped forward, her face hard with determination. I go with you. No, you go ahead of me? Marcus met her eyes, and for the first time, something like warmth entered his gaze. You find a position, you wait, and when Kessler shows himself, you do what you do best. And you? I do what I have to do. I give him the confrontation he wants. I keep his attention focused on me while you get into position. And when the moment comes, we end this together. Elena considered his words for a long moment. Then she nodded, a gesture of acceptance that carried the weight of shared purpose. Protocol 7, Section 12. When facing a superior enemy in prepared positions, the solution is never confrontation. It is misdirection. Marcus almost smiled. You really did read everything I wrote. I memorized it. Every word. It kept me alive in places that should have killed me. She paused, something shifting in her expression. Your grandson. We will get him back. Yes, we will. Marcus turned to Stone. Hold this position. If we are not back in 4 hours, call for extraction and report mission failure. Commander, that is an order, Sergeant. Whatever happens in those mountains, the rest of the team goes home. Understood? Stone's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Understood, sir. Marcus took one last look at his team. These men who had followed him into hell more times than any of them could count. These warriors who trusted him with their lives and would die for him if he asked. He would not ask, not today. Today the burden was his alone. He turned and walked toward the mountains, Elena moving silently beside him. Behind them the valley held its secrets. The bodies of the fallen, the silence of aftermath, the weight of decisions that could not be taken back. And somewhere ahead, Victor Kessler waited with a 19-year-old boy who had no idea that his life depended on 2 old soldiers settling a score that had been building since before he was born. The hunt continued, but now the stakes were higher than either hunter had ever imagined. The terrain changed as they moved deeper into the mountains. The flat valley floor gave way to rocky slopes covered with scrub brush and scattered boulders, the kind of landscape that offered 1,000 hiding places for friends and enemies alike. Marcus led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines above, looking for the glint of glass or the shadow of movement that would betray an ambush. Elena moved 15 meters to his right, parallel but separate, her own rifle now assembled and ready. They communicated in hand signals, the silent language of operators who had learned that sound could kill as surely as any bullet. Every few hundred meters, they would pause, listening, waiting, letting the mountain reveal its secrets before advancing further. The coordinates Kessler had provided led to a narrow canyon that cut through the mountains like a wound in the earth. The walls rose steep on either side, creating a natural funnel that limited movement and maximized the advantage of anyone holding the high ground. Classic ambush terrain, classic Kessler. Marcus stopped at the canyon entrance, studying the approach with eyes that had evaluated 1,000 similar situations. The path ahead was clear, almost invitingly so. A trail worn smooth by decades of passage wound through the rocks, offering easy footing and direct access to whatever lay beyond. Too easy, too obvious. Elena appeared at his elbow, her voice barely above a whisper. There is a secondary approach. West side through the rocks. It will take longer, but it provides better cover and better firing positions. She nodded. If Kessler has Ethan at the end of this canyon, he will expect you to come straight up the middle. He will have his positions oriented for that approach. And if we come from the side, his geometry changes. His advantages become vulnerabilities. Marcus looked at the canyon, then at the rocky slope that rose to the west. It would be a difficult climb, especially for a man his age. His knees would protest. His lungs would burn. Every step would be a reminder that 68 years of hard living had taken their toll. But his grandson was at the end of this canyon, and Marcus Cole had never let physical limitations stop him from doing what needed to be done. We split here. Marcus pointed to a cluster of boulders halfway up the western slope. You establish position there. That will give you line of sight to most of the canyon floor while maintaining concealment from below. And you? I go up the middle. Give Kessler what he expects. Let him think his trap is working. That is suicide. Maybe. But it is also our best chance of keeping Ethan alive. If Kessler believes he has won, he will get careless. He will want to gloat, to prove his superiority. That is his weakness. Pride. It always has been. Elena studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You know him that well? I knew him for 15 years before Panama. We trained together, fought together, watched each other's backs in places that do not exist on any official map. I know how he thinks because I helped shape how he thinks. And he knows you the same way. He knew the man I was 35 years ago. Marcus checked his rifle one final time, confirming the round in the chamber. But I have changed. I have learned things he does not expect. I have become something he cannot predict. What have you become? Marcus considered the question carefully. It deserved an honest answer. A grandfather. For the first time in my life, I have something to lose that matters more than winning. Kessler does not understand that. He still thinks this is about competition, about proving who is better. He does not realize that I am not here to win. I am here to save my grandson. Those are very different objectives with very different strategies. Elena absorbed his words in silence. Then she reached into her vest and withdrew a small device, pressing it into his hand. Emergency beacon. If things go wrong, activate it and I will know where you are. Marcus looked at the device, then back at Elena. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Thank me when we get your grandson out alive. She turned and began climbing the western slope, her movements fluid and efficient despite the difficult terrain. Marcus watched her go until she disappeared among the boulders, becoming one with the landscape in a way that spoke of years of training and natural talent. Then he turned to face the canyon. The entrance loomed before him like the mouth of some great beast, dark and threatening, waiting to swallow whoever was foolish enough to enter. Marcus thought about all the canyons he had walked into over 45 years of combat operations, the ones that had been straightforward, the ones that had been traps, the ones that had cost lives, and the ones that had been survived through luck and skill and sheer stubborn refusal to die. This one felt different. This one was personal in a way that none of the others had been. He thought about Ethan, somewhere in the darkness ahead. 19 years old, just beginning his journey as a warrior, now caught in a conflict that had started before his father was born. The boy had done nothing wrong. He had simply been brave and foolish and young, exactly as Marcus had been at that age. Exactly as every Cole had been for 3 generations. The sins of the fathers visited upon the sons, the endless cycle of violence that consumed each generation in turn. But not today. Not if Marcus had anything to say about it. He took a deep breath, letting the dry mountain air fill his lungs. Then he stepped into the canyon and began walking toward whatever awaited him at its end. The walls rose around him, blocking out the sun, creating a twilight world of shadow and stone. His footsteps echoed off the rock faces, announcing his presence to anyone who might be listening. He made no attempt at stealth. He wanted Kessler to know he was coming. He wanted the attention focused on him, not on Elena, not on the angle of attack that his enemy would never see coming. The path wound deeper into the canyon, following the natural contours of the terrain. Here and there, Marcus spotted signs of recent passage. A boot print in the dust, a scrape on a rock face, small markers that confirmed what he already knew. People had been here recently. People were here still. A voice echoed down from somewhere above. I see you chose the direct approach. Kessler sounded almost pleased. I expected nothing less. You always did prefer straightforward solutions. No subtlety, no creativity, just brute force and determination. Marcus kept walking, his rifle held ready but not raised. He could not see Kessler yet, which meant Kessler had not committed to a firing position. The man was still playing games, still trying to get inside Marcus's head. "Where is my grandson, Victor?" "Safe. For now. His life depends entirely on your behavior over the next few minutes. Make the right choices, and he goes home. Make the wrong ones, and I send him back to his father in pieces." The canyon opened into a wider space, a natural amphitheater carved by millennia of water erosion. In the center, tied to a rock outcropping, was Ethan Cole. The boy's face was bloody, his uniform torn, but his eyes were alert and defiant. He had not been broken. Not yet. "Grandfather." Ethan's voice was steady despite the fear that must have been coursing through him. "Do not worry about me. Do what you have to do." Marcus felt something break inside him at the sound of those words. His grandson, 19 years old, facing death with the same courage that generations of Coles had carried into battle. The same courage that had made Marcus what he was. The same courage that might get them both killed. "I am not leaving without you." A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the amphitheater. Victor Kessler, 71 years old but still moving with the dangerous grace of a predator. His hair had gone white, his face lined with decades of hard living, but his eyes were the same cold blue that Marcus remembered. The eyes of a man who had decided long ago that other people's lives had no value except as tools to be used and discarded. "You came alone." Kessler sounded almost disappointed. "I had hoped you might bring your specialist. I would have enjoyed testing her skills." "This is between us, Victor. No one else needs to die today." "Everyone dies eventually, Marcus. Today, tomorrow, 30 years from now. The timing is irrelevant. What matters is how we die, with honor or without, as warriors or as cowards." Marcus moved slowly into the amphitheater, his eyes taking in every detail. The positions of potential cover, the angles of fire, the distance between himself and Ethan, the distance between himself and Kessler. You talk about honor, but there is no honor in using a 19-year-old boy as bait. He volunteered, in a sense, by being your grandson, by carrying your blood. The sins of the fathers, Marcus. You of all people should understand that. Marcus felt his finger tightening on the trigger guard. He could take the shot. Kessler was exposed, confident in his control of the situation. One bullet, one death, and this would be over. But Kessler was too smart for that. There would be a fail-safe, a dead man's switch, something that would ensure Ethan died if Marcus pulled the trigger without authorization. "Tell me what you want, Victor. Really want. Not the philosophical nonsense about competition and proving yourself. What do you actually hope to accomplish here?" Kessler smiled, a thin expression that held no warmth. "What I want is simple. I want you to admit it. Admit that I was always better than you. That the only reason you got the recognition, the promotions, the respect, was because you played the game better. You followed the rules. You said the right things to the right people, while I did the actual work." Marcus stared at his former friend, seeing for the first time the depth of resentment that had been festering for half a century. "That is what this is about? Professional jealousy?" "It is about truth, about acknowledging reality instead of hiding behind comfortable lies. Admit it, Marcus. Admit that I was the better sniper, the better tactician, the better soldier. Admit it, and I let your grandson go." High above, invisible among the rocks, Elena Ashford settled into her firing position. And through her scope, she watched two old enemies finally face the truth that had been hiding between them for 50 years. The amphitheater held the silence of a tomb. Sunlight filtered down through gaps in the canyon walls above, creating columns of gold that illuminated the dust hanging motionless in the air. Marcus Cole stood at the entrance to this natural arena, his rifle held low but ready, his eyes fixed on the two figures at the center of the space. Victor Kessler had positioned himself with the instincts of a predator who had survived 7 decades by never leaving anything to chance. His back was to a solid rock wall, eliminating any approach from behind. His rifle rested against a boulder within easy reach, but his hands were empty, a gesture of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He wanted Marcus to know that he did not consider him a threat, not anymore. Ethan knelt on the ground between them, his wrists bound behind his back with tactical cord that cut into his skin whenever he moved. The boy's face was a mask of controlled fear. the expression of someone who understood exactly how much danger he was in, but refused to let that understanding break him. Cold blood, cold stubbornness, the genetic inheritance that had produced 3 generations of warriors who would rather die than show weakness. Admit it, Marcus, Kessler's voice echoed off the canyon walls, amplified by the natural acoustics of the amphitheater. Admit that I was always the better soldier. Say the words and this ends peacefully. Your grandson goes home. You go home. We all pretend the last 35 years never happened. Marcus took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between himself and his former friend with the slow deliberation of a man who understood that every movement was being evaluated, analyzed, factored into whatever calculation was running behind Kessler's cold blue eyes. You want me to lie to make you feel better about your choices? I want you to tell the truth for once in your life. Kessler's smile was thin, predatory. We both know what happened in Berlin. We both know why you got the promotion and I got shipped off to a training facility in the middle of nowhere. Politics, Marcus. You played the game and I refused to. That does not make you better. It makes you more compliant. The mention of Berlin triggered something in Marcus's memory, a door opening onto a room he had kept locked for nearly 50 years. He felt the past rushing back with a force that threatened to overwhelm the present, images and sounds and smells that had been buried under decades of newer experiences. Berlin, winter of 1970, 2 young men lying in the frozen ruins of a bombed-out building watching a Soviet intelligence officer through rifle scopes as snow fell silently around them. Marcus had been 22 years old, Kessler 25. They had been partners for 3 years by then, forged into a single unit by shared experience and the particular brotherhood that only combat could create. The mission had been straightforward. Eliminate the Soviet officer before he could pass sensitive documents to an East German contact. A clean shot from 300 meters, through a window that would be open for exactly 90 seconds during the scheduled meeting. But nothing was ever straightforward in the shadow world they inhabited. Marcus remembered the cold, the bone-deep chill that seeped through every layer of clothing, that turned fingers numb and made precision shooting nearly impossible. He remembered the way his breath had fogged the air, each exhale a potential betrayal of their position to anyone watching from the buildings across the street. And he remembered the argument. Kessler had wanted to take the shot immediately as soon as the target appeared. Quick, clean, efficient, no waiting for the perfect moment, no overthinking. Just pull the trigger and let the mathematics of ballistics do the rest. Marcus had disagreed. The angle was wrong, the window was partially obscured by frost. A rush shot might wound instead of kill, might alert the security detail, might turn a clean operation into a messy extraction under fire. They had argued in whispers, their breath forming clouds that mingled and dissipated in the frozen air. 2 professionals with different philosophies, different approaches to the same problem. In the end, Marcus had pulled rank. He was the designated shooter, his finger on the trigger, his call. He waited. 60 seconds, 90 seconds. The window cleared as the heat from inside melted the frost. The Soviet officer moved into the perfect position, his back to the window, his attention focused on the documents in his hands. 1 shot, 1 kill, mission complete. But Kessler had never forgiven him for the wait, for the 90 seconds that felt like hours, for the disagreement that he interpreted as a personal challenge to his judgment. The report that went back to command had praised Marcus's patience, his discipline, his ability to wait for the optimal moment. The commendations had followed. The promotions, the reputation that would eventually make him the Phantom of Ramadi, the ghost of the DMZ, the legend that young operators still talked about in hushed voices. Kessler had received nothing. A footnote in someone else's success story. The spotter who had wanted to rush the shot that his partner had executed perfectly. That was when the resentment had started. That was when the brotherhood had begun to crack. You think Berlin was about politics? Marcus kept his voice steady, revealing nothing of the memories churning beneath the surface. Berlin was about doing the job right, about patience and discipline and not letting ego override judgment. It was about you proving that you were in charge, that your way was the only way. Kessler's voice had risen slightly, the calm facade beginning to show cracks. You made me look like an amateur in front of everyone who mattered. And then you spent the next 12 years climbing the ladder while I rotted in training assignments and administrative postings. You rotted because you could not follow orders, because every commander you served under filed the same complaint. Brilliant tactician. Impossible to work with. The words came out harder than Marcus intended. You think I sabotaged your career? You sabotaged yourself, Victor. Every single time. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then Kessler laughed, a genuine laugh, full of something that might have been admiration or might have been contempt. There it is, the famous Marcus Cole honesty. No diplomacy, no softening the blow. Just the truth as you see it, consequences be damned. Kessler shook his head slowly. You know what the irony is? That brutal honesty is exactly what made you a great soldier, and exactly what made you a terrible friend. I was your friend. You were my competitor. Kessler's voice had gone soft, almost gentle. From the very first day we met, you were the standard I measured myself against, the rival I could never quite defeat. When you succeeded, I felt like I had failed. When you were praised, I heard criticism of myself. That is not friendship, Marcus. That is obsession. High above the amphitheater, invisible among the rocks that crowned the canyon walls, Elena Ashford listened to every word through the earpiece connected to Marcus's radio. Her rifle was steady, her breathing controlled, her eye pressed to the scope that showed her both men in perfect clarity. She had heard stories like this before, the particular poison that could grow between soldiers who spent too much time together in too much danger. The competition that started as motivation and curdled into something darker. The resentments that festered in silence until they erupted into violence. But hearing it from Kessler's own lips added a dimension she had not expected. The man was not simply a monster. He was a damaged human being, broken by decades of feeling second best, twisted by jealousy into something that had lost all connection to normal human emotion. It did not make her sympathize with him. It did not change what she intended to do, but it helped her understand the particular flavor of madness she was dealing with. Her scope tracked across the amphitheater, evaluating the tactical situation. Kessler was positioned well, his back protected, his escape routes limited, but viable. Ethan was in the center of the space, directly in the line of fire from most angles. Marcus was approaching slowly, reducing the distance, but also reducing his own options for cover. And somewhere in the shadows at the edge of the amphitheater, Elena spotted something that made her breath catch. Movement, barely visible. A shape that did not belong to the natural terrain. Kessler had backup, hidden shooters that neither Marcus nor Elena had detected during their approach. At least two, maybe more, concealed in positions that gave them overlapping fields of fire across the entire space. This was not just a confrontation. This was an execution waiting to happen. Elena keyed her radio, 3 quick clicks that signaled danger without words. She saw Marcus's posture shift almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the warning without giving away that he had received it. They were surrounded, outnumbered, walking into exactly the trap that Kessler had designed. And somewhere in the back of Elena's mind, a voice that sounded like Danny Morrison whispered a warning from beyond the grave. Tunnel vision kills, Elena. Never forget the secondary threats. She had not forgotten. Not this time. This time she would see everything, account for everything, eliminate every threat before it could eliminate the people she was protecting. But first she needed Marcus to buy her time. Time to identify all the hidden shooters. Time to calculate the angles. Time to become the instrument of death that her training had made her. Down in the amphitheater, Marcus was doing exactly what she needed him to do. He was talking, engaging Kessler's attention, keeping the focus on the drama playing out in the center of the space while Elena worked the problem from above. So this is what 50 years of resentment looks like. Marcus gestured at the canyon, at Ethan, at the entire elaborate trap. All of this because you could not accept being second place in Berlin. This is not about Berlin. Kessler's voice had gone cold again, the moment of vulnerability passing. Berlin was just the beginning, the symptom of a larger disease. You represent everything wrong with the system, Marcus, the way it rewards compliance over excellence, the way it promotes politicians instead of warriors, the way it turns soldiers into servants. And Panama, Marcus asked quietly, was stealing $3 million and disappearing your way of fixing the system? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Kessler's expression shifted, something dark and painful flickering behind his eyes before the mask of control reasserted itself. Panama was about survival. Kessler's voice was flat now, emotionless. They ordered me to execute civilians, Marcus. A woman and her child who had witnessed something they should not have seen. Collateral damage, the colonel called them. Loose ends that needed to be tied. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had never heard this version of the story. The official report had listed Kessler as a traitor who had stolen operational funds and deserted. Nothing about civilian targets. Nothing about impossible orders. You refused. I refused. And they told me I would face court-martial for disobedience. That my career was over. That everything I had built over 20 years of service meant nothing because I would not murder a 6-year-old girl. Kessler's laugh was bitter, broken. So I took the money. I disappeared. I became what they had always accused me of being. Because if I was going to be destroyed anyway, I might as well profit from the destruction. The revelation changed something in the air between them. Marcus could feel the weight of it, the complexity of a situation that had seemed so simple from the outside. Kessler the traitor. Kessler the enemy. Kessler the monster who sold death to the highest bidder. But underneath that monster was a man who had been asked to do something unforgivable and had chosen to refuse. A man who had been punished for his conscience and had responded by abandoning conscience altogether. That does not justify 35 years of murder for hire. Nothing justifies anything, Marcus. Kessler's voice was tired now, the voice of an old man who had lived too long and seen too much. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of what we do. Duty, honor, country. But at the end of the day, we are all just killers. The only difference is who signs our paychecks. I never killed a child. Neither did I. Kessler met his eyes directly. I never crossed that line, Marcus. Every target I eliminated over the past 35 years was someone who had earned their death. Warlords, arms dealers, dictators who murdered their own people by the thousands. I was more selective in my targets than the government ever was. I just did not pretend to have moral authority while doing it. Marcus thought about the 187 kills that Elena had accumulated for Shadow Talons, about the targets she had eliminated on orders that came from offices in Washington, approved by people who would never have to look their victims in the eyes, about the moral complexity of violence in service of a cause versus violence in service of self. The lines were not as clear as he had always believed. The boundaries between hero and villain were not as solid as the training manual suggested. But none of that changed what was happening right now. None of that changed the fact that Ethan was kneeling in the dirt with his life hanging by a thread. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to understand. Kessler took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Because when I kill you, I want you to know why. Not because I hate you, Marcus. I never hated you. I envied you. I resented you. But hate requires a certain kind of passion that I burned out of myself a long time ago. I am killing you because you represent the lie. The myth of the honorable warrior. The fiction that violence can be moral as long as the right flag is waving. And Ethan? What does he represent? Kessler glanced at the boy kneeling between them. He represents the future. The next generation of men who will be fed the same lies and sent to die in the same pointless wars. Unless someone breaks the cycle. Unless someone shows them what service to their country really means. By murdering a 19-year-old kid? By giving you a choice. Kessler's eyes returned to Marcus, cold and calculating. Your life for his, it is that simple. Kneel down beside him. Put your weapon on the ground. Let me end this the way it should have ended in Berlin 50 years ago. And your grandson walks out of here alive. The offer hung in the air, impossibly tempting, impossibly cruel. Marcus looked at Ethan, at the fear and defiance warring in the boy's eyes. He thought about James, his son, who would never forgive him if Ethan died. He thought about the 3 generations of Coal warriors, stretching back through history like a chain of duty and sacrifice. And he thought about Elena, somewhere above them, watching through her scope, waiting for the moment when she could change the equation entirely. Before I decide, Marcus said slowly, there is something you should know. What is that? You think you know everything about me, about my career, about the protocols I developed for Shadow Talons? But there is one thing you never learned. One student I trained who did not come from your lineage. One operator who took everything you taught and everything I taught and forged it into something neither of us could have imagined. Kessler's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Elena Ashford. The name fell into the silence like a stone into still water. You think she is just another Shadow Talons operative working off your original protocols. But she found the flaws, Victor. the kill switches you built into your training, the vulnerabilities you designed to give yourself an edge against any student who might turn against you. She found them and she eliminated them, and then she evolved beyond anything either of us created. For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus saw something like uncertainty flicker across Kessler's face. She is here? She has been in position since before I entered the canyon. Marcus kept his voice calm, conversational. Right now she is calculating the angles on your hidden shooters, the ones you thought I had not detected. Give her another 2 minutes and she will have solutions for all of them. Kessler's composure cracked. His hand moved toward the rifle resting against the boulder, then stopped. His eyes swept the canyon walls above, searching for a threat he could not see. You are bluffing. You know me better than that, Victor. Have I ever bluffed about operational matters? The question hung in the air, and Marcus saw the answer in Kessler's eyes. No, Marcus Cole did not bluff. Marcus Cole spoke the truth, even when the truth was brutal, even when it would have been easier to lie. What do you want? I want my grandson released. Marcus took another step forward. I want your shooters to stand down, and then I want to finish this conversation man to man, without hostages, without hidden backup, without all the elaborate games you have constructed around this moment. And if I refuse, then Elena starts shooting. And you know better than anyone what a Shadow Talon's operator is capable of when she has time to prepare. High above, Elena made her decision. She had identified 3 hidden shooters now, triangulating their positions from the subtle signs they could not completely hide. The angles were difficult, but not impossible. The distances were within her capabilities. If she moved quickly enough, she could eliminate all 3 before they could react. But Kessler was still a wild card. His hand was inches from his rifle. If he grabbed it and fired before she could switch targets, either Marcus or Ethan could die. She needed a distraction, something to buy her the split second she needed to begin her work. The radio crackled. Marcus's voice calm and deliberate. Elena, now. She fired. The first shooter ever saw it coming. Her bullet crossed 800 meters of canyon space and found him exactly where his head met his spine, dropping him without a sound. She was already moving the rifle before his body hit the ground, acquiring the second target with the smooth precision that decades of training had made automatic. Kessler reacted instantly, his hand closing on his rifle, but Marcus was already moving too. The commander covered the distance between them in 3 lunging steps, crashing into Kessler before he could bring the weapon to bear. They went down together, 2 old men grappling in the dust, fighting with a desperation that transcended technique. Elena's second shot took out another hidden shooter, then the third. The amphitheater erupted into chaos, echoes bouncing off the walls, dust rising from the struggle at the center of the space. Ethan threw himself sideways, rolling away from the combat, his bound hands making movement awkward, but not impossible. The boy was smart enough to know that the safest place in a firefight was as far from the shooting as possible. Marcus and Kessler fought on the ground, each man trying to gain advantage over the other. They were evenly matched in experience, but Kessler was younger by 3 years and had kept himself in better condition. Marcus felt himself being overpowered, felt Kessler's hands closing around his throat, cutting off air and blood to his brain. You should have waited my offer. Kessler's voice was a harsh whisper in his ear. You should have died with dignity instead of fighting like an animal. Marcus's vision was starting to narrow, darkness creeping in from the edges. He could feel his strength fading, his body betraying him after 68 years of hard use. But he was not finished yet. His hand found the pistol at his hip, the Colt 1911 that had been his constant companion since 1975. He did not have the angle for a killing shot, but he did not need one. He pressed the muzzle against Kessler's thigh and pulled the trigger. The report was deafening at close range. Kessler screamed, his grip loosening as pain overwhelmed his focus. Marcus twisted free, gasping for air, rolling away from his former friend as blood poured from the wound in Kessler's leg. Elena had descended from her position, moving through the rocks with the fluid grace of a predator closing on wounded prey. Her rifle was up, trained on Kessler, her finger resting on the trigger. Give me a reason. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Please give me a reason. Kessler lay in the dust, clutching his ruined thigh, his face contorted with pain. But even now, even bleeding and defeated, there was something in his eyes that refused to surrender. You think this is over? His laugh was wet, bubbling with blood from somewhere internal. You think killing me ends anything? I have trained 100 operators over the past 3 decades, created networks that span every continent. I am not a man, Elena Ashford. I am an idea. And ideas do not die just because you pull a trigger. Maybe not. Elena's voice never wavered. But you will. Wait. Marcus's voice stopped her finger before it could complete its motion. He pushed himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest, and walked slowly toward the man who had been his brother and his enemy for half a century. He deserves to die, probably. Marcus looked down at Kessler, seeing not the monster, but the young man he had known in Berlin, the friend who had watched his back through situations that should have killed them both. But not like this. Not an execution in the dirt. If he dies, it will be through legal process. Through the system he claims to despise. The system will never touch me. Kessler's voice was weakening, blood loss taking its toll. I have too many connections. Too many secrets that powerful people want kept buried. Then you will spend the rest of your life in a black site somewhere answering questions. Marcus knelt beside his former friend, close enough to see the fear that was finally beginning to show in those cold blue eyes. You were right about one thing, Victor. We are both killers, but there is a difference between us. I know when to stop. He stood and walked toward Ethan, pulling a knife from his vest to cut the cord binding the boy's wrists. His grandson looked up at him with eyes that held 1,000 questions, but Marcus shook his head. Later. We will talk about all of it later. Right now, we need to get out of here. Behind them, Elena maintained her position over Kessler, her rifle never wavering. The wounded man had stopped struggling, his blood spreading in a dark pool across the canyon floor. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed almost peaceful after the violence that had filled the afternoon. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of helicopters was growing closer. The extraction that Stone must have called when he heard the gunfire echoing through the mountains. Marcus put his arm around Ethan's shoulders, steadying the boy as they walked toward the canyon entrance. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before. His throat was bruised where Kessler's hands had closed. His vision was still not quite right from the oxygen deprivation. But his grandson was alive. His team was alive. The mission, mission, such as it was, had been accomplished. Grandfather. Ethan's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. What he said about Panama, about being ordered to kill civilians. Was that true? Marcus did not answer immediately. He thought about the long history of shadow operations, the things that were done in the name of national security that would never be acknowledged publicly. The moral compromises that every soldier eventually faced, whether they admitted it or not. I do not know, he finally said, but I intend to find out. The helicopters were visible now, their rotors catching the last light of the setting sun as they descended toward the valley floor. Derek Stone was the first one out, his weapon up, scanning for threats that had already been neutralized. Commander, Stone's face was a mixture of relief and concern. Medical team is standing by. We need to get you and the boy checked out. And him? Stone gestured toward the canyon, toward where Elena still stood guard over Kessler's wounded form. Secure him for transport. He has a lot of questions to answer. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Medical personnel, debriefings, the endless paperwork that accompanied any operation involving casualties and captured enemy combatants. Marcus moved through it all on autopilot, his body going through the motions while his mind processed the events of the day. Kessler had been stabilized and transported to a secure facility. The wound in his thigh was serious, but not life-threatening, which meant he would live long enough to face whatever justice awaited him. Whether that meant a trial or a quiet disappearance into the black site system, Marcus did not know. And at this moment, he did not care. What he cared about was standing in front of him now, a young man with cold blood in his veins and questions in his eyes that deserved honest answers. You could have killed him. Ethan's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that was still trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. When he was down, when Elena had him covered, you chose to let him live. Marcus considered the question carefully. His grandson deserved more than a simple answer. He deserved the truth, with all its complexity and contradiction. There was a time when I would have killed him without hesitation, when the equation would have been simple. Enemy down, threat eliminated, mission complete. But I am not that man anymore. What changed? Marcus looked at his grandson, seeing echoes of himself at that age. The same fire, the same certainty, the same belief that the world could be divided into clean categories of right and wrong, enemy and ally, hero and villain. I got old enough to understand that the lines are not as clear as they seem, that the men we call enemies are sometimes men who made different choices in impossible situations, that justice and revenge are not the same thing, even when they look similar from a distance. Ethan absorbed this in silence, his young face showing the struggle to reconcile what he had been taught with what he had just experienced. He was going to kill you. Kill both of us. Yes, and you still chose mercy. I chose process. I chose law. I chose to let someone other than me decide whether Victor Kessler lives or dies. Marcus paused, searching for words that would convey the weight of what he was trying to say. When you spend your whole life making those decisions alone, carrying that weight alone, you start to realize that it changes you. Every kill takes something away. Every life you end leaves a mark on your soul that never completely heals. I have enough marks, Ethan. I did not need another one. The night had fallen fully now, the Arizona stars blazing overhead with the brilliant clarity that only the desert could provide. Marcus and Ethan stood outside the medical tent, the sounds of the bass around them fading into the background as the moment stretched between them. Is it worth it? Ethan asked quietly. Everything you have done, everything you have sacrificed, was it worth the cost? Marcus remembered asking himself that same question in a dark office at 3 in the morning, staring at a photograph of a dead friend and a letter inviting him to retire. Ask me again in 20 years. Maybe by then I will have an answer. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew that something had changed. In the span of a single day, he had faced his past, protected his future, and discovered that some ghosts could be laid to rest without violence. Victor Kessler would answer for his crimes, Ethan would go home to his father, and Marcus Cole, the Phantom of Ramadi, the ghost of the DMZ, would finally be able to set down a burden he had been carrying for 50 years. The weight was still there. It would always be there, but it felt lighter now, shared across the generations, passed from grandfather to grandson like an inheritance that carried both blessing and curse. Old soldiers never died. They just found new ways to carry the weight. And sometimes, if they were very lucky, they found someone to help them carry it. Elena found Marcus an hour later, sitting alone on the hood of a military vehicle at the edge of the base perimeter. She had completed her own debrief, answered the questions that could be answered, deflected the ones that touched on classified information that even SOCOM did not have clearance to know. She moved quietly, but Marcus heard her coming. He always heard. That was one of the things that decades of combat had given him, a constant awareness of his surroundings that never fully turned off, even in moments of exhaustion. Mind if I join you? Marcus gestured to the space beside him without turning. Elena climbed up and settled onto the hood, the metal still warm from the day's heat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They watched the stars wheel overhead, the desert wind carrying the sounds of the base, the distant voices and mechanical noises that meant civilization in the midst of wilderness. You did good work today. Marcus's voice was rough, tired. Without you, this would have ended very differently. Without me, you would have found another way. Elena's response was matter of fact. Men like you always do. It is what makes you dangerous. Marcus almost smiled. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. Kessler was right about one thing. You are relentless. When you commit to something, you do not stop until it is done. That quality has kept you alive for 45 years. But it has also cost you. What do you mean? Elena turned to look at him, her gray-blue eyes reflecting the starlight. I read your file, the parts that are not redacted anyway. 3 marriages, all ended in divorce. Children you barely know. Grandchildren you see once or twice a year. You gave everything to the mission, Marcus. Every relationship, every connection, every chance at a normal life. The words hit harder than Marcus expected. He had told himself for years that the sacrifices were necessary, that the work was too important, that the people who depended on him to protect them mattered more than his own happiness. But hearing it spoken aloud by someone who understood the cost from personal experience made the rationalizations ring hollow. Is that what you are trying to avoid? He asked quietly. Is that why you left Shadow Talons? Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Marcus recognized. I left because I was becoming something I did not want to be. 187 kills, Marcus. After a while, I stopped feeling anything about it. The guilt, the doubt, the normal human responses to taking life, they just disappeared. Compartmentalization. We all learn it. This was different. Elena shook her head slowly. This was not compartmentalization. This was absence. Like the part of me that was supposed to process those experiences had been removed. Marcus understood what she was describing. He had felt it himself in the years after Coyote's death. What brought you back? Bulgaria, Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Operation Nightfall. My spotter was Danny Morrison. We called him Hawk. He was the best I ever worked with, and I got him killed. Marcus did not respond. He knew this story from his own experience. He knew that sometimes the only thing you could do was listen. We were tracking a target through the mountains. Arms dealer who had been supplying weapons to terrorist cells across Eastern Europe. The shot was completed 1,200 meters through partial cover, wind gusting unpredictably. I was so focused on the calculations, so deep in the mathematics of the kill, that I did not see the counter-sniper team that had been hired for security. Elena's hands tightened on the edge of the vehicle hood, her knuckles going white. Hawk called it. He saw them repositioning 5 seconds before they fired, but I was committed to my shot. Tunnel vision. The same thing that killed your friend in Kuwait. I could not break off, could not respond to his warning, and by the time my bullet found the primary target, their bullet had found Hawk. The parallel was almost too precise to be coincidence. Two snipers, separated by 3 decades, losing their spotters to the same tactical failure. The same narrowing of focus that turned extraordinary skill into fatal weakness. After that, I could not do it anymore. The numbness broke and everything I had been suppressing came flooding back. Every kill, every mission. It was like drowning in memories I did not know I still had. How did you survive? I almost did not. Elena's voice was flat, honest. But then I started writing, recording everything I remembered about Hawk. His stories, his jokes. I filled 3 notebooks with memories before I realized what I was doing. Building a memorial. Building a reason to keep going. Elena looked at Marcus directly. He wanted to open a restaurant. Hawk's Smokehouse. All those dreams just gone because I was too focused on a single shot. Marcus thought about Coyote, about the honky-tonk bar in Dallas that Jake Sullivan had wanted to open, about the 33 years he had spent carrying that memory like a stone in his chest. I wrote the protocols to prevent what happened to us, he said slowly. Protocol 7 is about maintaining awareness, about never letting the target become more important than the team. I wrote it after Coyote died, hoping that other snipers would not make the same mistake I made. I know, Elena's voice softened slightly. I read every word you wrote, Marcus. Your protocols saved my life a dozen times before Bulgaria, but they could not save Hawk because I had stopped following them. I had gotten arrogant, believed my own legend, thought I was too good to need the rules. And now I follow them like scripture. Every word, every technique, every reminder to check my flanks and trust my spotter, and never forget that the mission is not just about killing the enemy. It is about bringing your people home. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of sage and dust and the distant hint of rain somewhere over the mountains. The stars continued their ancient journey across the sky, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath them. Why did you come here? Marcus asked. Why take this mission, knowing that Kessler was involved, knowing that it would put you back in the field when you had already walked away? Elena took her time answering. Because I recognized his patterns. When the intelligence came through about the border shootings, I saw the signatures in the positioning, the same tactics I had been taught in my early training before your protocols replaced his. I knew it was Kessler, and I knew that if he was not stopped, more people would die. That is not the only reason. No, Elena's admission came slowly. I came because I needed to face him, to prove to myself that I could go back into the field without losing myself again. Kessler trained me, Marcus, not directly, but his methods shaped who I became. I needed to defeat those methods, to show that I was stronger than what he had created. And are you? Ask me in 20 years. Elena's voice carried a hint of dark humor. Maybe by then I will have an answer. Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw something he recognized. A warrior at a crossroads, a killer trying to become something more, a ghost searching for a way back to the world of the living. What are you going to do now? I do not know. Elena turned her gaze back to the stars. Shadow Talons is done with me. I burned those bridges when I walked away. But I cannot go back to being a civilian either. I tried that for 4 years. Analysis work, desk jobs, pretending that I was not trained to be something else entirely. It does not work. No, it does not work. She paused, something shifting in her expression. But maybe there is a third option, something between the extremes. What kind of option? Marcus watched her consider the question. Watched the thoughts moving behind her eyes as she worked through possibilities that had probably been forming since she first agreed to take this mission. You wrote the protocols that define how modern special operations snipers are trained. Your methods are used by every Tier 1 unit in the country, but those protocols have not been updated in almost 20 years. The technology has changed. The tactics have evolved. The threats are different than they were when you wrote the original documents. You want to help me rewrite them. I want to help make sure that what happened to Hawk, what happened to Coyote, does not happen to the next generation. Elena met his eyes directly. I have learned things that are not captured in your protocols. If we combined your experience with mine, we could create something better than either of us could build alone. Marcus considered the proposal. It made a certain kind of sense. Two damaged warriors using their scars to protect others from the same wounds. It would not be field work. It would be teaching, passing on what we have learned. The ghost of Coyote whispered in the back of Marcus's mind, something that might have been approval. Let me talk to my son. James has connections at SOCOM. If anyone can make something like this happen, it is him. Elena nodded slowly. There is something else you should know. About Kessler. About what he said regarding the kill switches in his training. What about it? I found them. All of them. Over the years, I identified every vulnerability he had built into his protocols, and I developed counters for each one. But I never documented the process. Never told anyone how I did it. If there are other operators out there who were trained in his methods, they might still be vulnerable. You want to share what you learned. I want to protect people who do not even know they need protecting. Marcus looked at Elena Ashford, this woman who had appeared in his life as a forgettable analyst and had revealed herself to be one of the most capable warriors he had ever encountered. She was broken in ways that only another broken soldier could understand. She was carrying weight that would crush most people, and she was trying to find a way forward that did not require more killing. He saw himself in her, 30 years younger, walking the same path. We start tomorrow. Marcus made the decision without fully planning it. After the debriefs are done and the paperwork is filed, we sit down and we start mapping out what a new set of protocols would look like. Elena's expression did not change, but something shifted in her posture. A release of tension that she had probably not even known she was holding. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Marcus slid off the hood of the vehicle, his old bones protesting the movement. Thank me when we have actually accomplished something. He started walking back toward the base, toward the tent where Ethan was probably still waiting for him. But he paused after a few steps and turned back. Elena, yes? Hawk would be proud of you. Marcus let the words settle into the desert air. Whatever mistakes you made, whatever you think you did wrong, he would be proud of who you are trying to become. He did not wait for a response. He walked away into the night, leaving Elena alone with the stars and the wind and the first fragile hope she had felt in 4 years. Behind him in the darkness, she allowed herself a single moment of something that might have been peace. Then she composed herself, checked her weapon out of habit, and followed him back toward the lights of the base. There was work to be done, and for the first time in a very long time, it was work that did not require killing. 3 weeks passed like water through cupped hands. The Arizona desert moved through its ancient rhythms of heat and cold, day and night, the endless cycle that had continued long before humans built their bases and fought their wars and would continue long after the last soldier had returned to dust. Marcus Cole spent those weeks in a kind of suspended animation. The debriefings were finished. The reports were filed. Victor Kessler had been transported to a black site facility somewhere in the vast network of secret prisons that the government maintained for prisoners too dangerous or too valuable to process through normal channels. Whether he would ever face a public trial remained unclear. Some ghosts were meant to stay buried. The wound on Marcus's throat had faded to a yellowish bruise that his collar mostly concealed. The deeper wounds, the ones that could not be seen, were taking longer to heal. He found himself waking at 3 in the morning again, sitting alone in his office, staring at the photograph of 2 young men smiling in front of a burned-out tank. Coyote's face seemed different now. Marcus had looked at that photograph 1,000 times over 33 years, but something had shifted in the way he saw it. The smile was the same. The eyes were the same. But the meaning behind the image had changed, deepened. becomes something more complex than simple grief. He had told Ethan that he did not know if the sacrifices were worth it. That had been the truth. But in the weeks since the canyon, Marcus had begun to suspect that the question itself was wrong. Worth was not a calculation that could be made in retrospect. It was not a balance sheet where lives lost could be weighed against lives saved. Worth was something you decided in the moment and then spent the rest of your existence learning to live with. The knock on his door came at 4:37 on a Thursday morning. Marcus knew who it was before he opened it. He had been expecting this visit for days. James Cole stood in the hallway wearing civilian clothes that somehow looked more uncomfortable on him than his uniform ever had. At 42 years old, Marcus's son had achieved a rank that would have seemed impossible to the young Marine who had shipped out for his first tour in 1975. Colonel James Cole, SOCOM liaison, with a corner office in Washington and enough political connections to make things happen or make them disappear. But right now, standing in the doorway of his father's small office at Dark 30, James just looked tired and angry, and something else that Marcus recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror. Afraid. Dad, James. They stood there for a moment, father and son, separated by decades of distance and duty and words that had never been spoken. Then James stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. I got the full debrief. James's voice was controlled, professional. The voice of a man who had learned to keep his emotions buried where they could not interfere with his judgment. Ethan told me what happened, what you did, what you risked. He would have done the same for any of his team. But he was not any of his team. He was your grandson, my son. James's composure cracked slightly, a flash of raw emotion breaking through the careful facade. You took him into a trap. You knew it was a trap, and you walked right into it anyway. I walked into it because there was no other choice. Marcus kept his voice steady. Kessler would have killed him. You know that. I know that. The only variable was whether I could save him or not. And if you could not, if your plan had failed, if Elena had missed her shots, or Kessler had been faster than you expected, James's voice rose slightly, I would have lost my father and my son in the same day. Have you thought about what that would have done to this family? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither man wanted to examine too closely. Every day. Marcus's answer came slowly, each word measured. Every day for the past 45 years, I have thought about what my choices do to the people who depend on me. Every mission, every operation, every time I walk out the door, not knowing if I will come back. Then why do you keep doing it? James's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. You are 68 years old, Dad. You have given this country everything. Your youth, your health, 3 marriages, a relationship with your children that barely exists. When is it enough? When do you finally get to stop? Marcus looked at his son, really looked, and saw for the first time the cost that his choices had imposed on others. James had grown up without a father in any meaningful sense. Christmas mornings interrupted by phone calls, birthday parties canceled because of deployments, school plays and football games and graduations attended by an empty chair because Marcus was always somewhere else, doing something important, saving lives that seemed to matter more than the ones waiting for him at home. I do not know. The admission cost Marcus something he could not name. I have been asking myself that question for years. Every time they send a retirement letter, every time my body reminds me that I am not the man I used to be, I tell myself that this will be the last mission, that after this one, I will finally hang up the rifle and learn how to be a normal person. But you never do. I never do. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. Ethan worships you. You know that. The Phantom of Ramadi, the ghost of the DMZ. He grew up hearing stories about his grandfather, the legend. And now he has seen what that legend really means. What it costs to be the man in those stories. Marcus thought about his grandson, 19 years old, kneeling in the dust with his hands bound behind his back. The fear in his eyes, the defiance, the courage that had been passed down through 3 generations of Cole warriors. What did he tell you? He told me that you chose to spare Kessler's life when you could have killed him. That you talked about justice and process and letting the system decide. He said it was the bravest thing he had ever seen anyone do. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, not quite pain, not quite relief, something in between. He told me something else too. James moved to the window, looking out at the desert that was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. He said that you talked about the weight, the burden that every kill puts on your soul, the marks that never heal. That was for him to understand, not for you to know. But I do know. James turned back to face his father. Because I carry my own weight, Dad. Different from yours, maybe. I have never pulled a trigger in combat. I have never looked a man in the eyes while the life left his body. But I have signed orders that sent men to die. I have made decisions in air-conditioned offices that ended lives on the other side of the world. And I have spent 30 years wondering if I am any different from you. You are different. Am I? James's laugh was bitter. The uniform is different. The desk is different. But at the end of the day, we are both men who send other men to die. The only difference is that you have the courage to go with them. The sunrise was beginning now, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose that seemed almost too beautiful for the conversation happening inside the small room. Marcus watched the light spread across the sand and thought about all the sunrises he had seen in 45 years of service. The ones in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. The ones that came after battles where men died screaming. The ones that marked the end of missions and the beginning of whatever came next. I want you to do something for me. Marcus's voice was quiet. I want you to stay for the weekend. There is a gathering happening on Saturday. The team, Elena Ashford. Some people who need to say goodbye to the ghosts they have been carrying. What kind of gathering? A barbecue. Marcus almost smiled at the expression on his son's face. I know it sounds strange, but sometimes the simple things are the most important. We are going to cook some food, tell some stories, remember some people who deserve to be remembered. And Ethan? Ethan will be there. He has earned his place. James studied his father for a long moment. Marcus could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the political implications, the career considerations, all the things that a colonel at SOCOM had to think about before committing to anything, even a family barbecue. I will be there. The preparations for Saturday took on a significance that surprised even Marcus. Elena had brought Hawk's notebook, the one filled with recipes and floor plans and dreams that would never be realized. She spent hours studying the pages, deciphering handwriting that only she could read, translating measurements and techniques from memory into something that could actually be cooked. The brisket was the centerpiece. Hawk had spent 3 years perfecting his technique, a fusion of Texas tradition and Carolina innovation that he had never gotten to serve to anyone outside of their small circle. The recipe called for a specific wood blend, a particular spice rub, a timing sequence that had to be followed with almost religious precision. This was his life's work. Elena stood in the kitchen of the base recreational facility, surrounded by ingredients and equipment, her face showing an intensity that Marcus recognized from the battlefield. Everything he wanted to create, everything he hoped to share with the world, all of it reduced to ink on paper because a bullet found him before he could make it real. Then we make it real. Marcus picked up one of the notebooks, studying the careful diagrams and notes. We cook it the way he would have cooked it. We serve it to people who will appreciate what it means. It will not bring him back. Nothing brings them back. But it might help us live with the fact that they are gone. The cooking began early Saturday morning, when the desert was still cool and the stars were fading into the brightening sky. Marcus and Elena worked side by side, following Hawk's instructions with the careful attention that both of them brought to their professional work. The smoker was loaded. The fire was started. The meat was prepared with spices and rubs that Hawk had tested dozens of times until he found the perfect combination. The smell began to fill the air around noon, rich and smoky and somehow hopeful, like a promise of good things to come. The team started arriving around 1, drawn by the scent and the invitation that had gone out through unofficial channels. Derek Stone was first, bringing beer that was technically against regulations. Sean Murphy followed with sides that his mother had taught him to make. One by one, the men who had survived the canyon gathered around the smoker, watching the meat cook, sharing stories, beginning the process of turning trauma into memory. James Cole arrived at 2 with Ethan beside him. Father and son, standing at the edge of the gathering, uncertain of their place in a world that had always belonged to grandfather and grandson. Marcus watched them from across the yard and felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. Come, he gestured them forward. You are family. This is where family belongs. The afternoon unfolded with a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. The brisket reached its perfect temperature. The sides were assembled, Someone found a portable speaker and connected it to a phone, and suddenly the yard was filled with the kind of country music that Hawk used to hum during long hours of surveillance. Elena stood apart for a moment, watching the scene with eyes that held something Marcus had not seen before. Peace, perhaps, or the beginning of peace. The first tentative steps toward a future that did not require her to be alone. He would have loved this. Her voice was soft, meant only for Marcus. All these people, the food, the music, this was what he wanted to create. A place where people could come together and forget about the darkness for a while. Then we keep creating it. Marcus handed her a plate loaded with brisket and all the accompaniments. As many times as it takes. As long as it takes. The meal was everything Hawk had hoped it would be. The meat was tender and smoky, infused with flavors that seemed to carry memory in every bite. People ate in silence at first, then began to talk, then to laugh. The conversation building like a fire that started small and grew until it illuminated everything around it. Stories emerged from the silence. Stories about Hawk and Coyote and all the others who had not survived to see this day. Not sad stories, though sadness was there. Stories about the jokes they told, the mistakes they made, the moments of unexpected grace that appeared in the midst of chaos, the ways they had touched the lives of the people who survived them. Marcus found himself talking about Kuwait for the first time in 33 years. Not the sanitized version that appeared in official reports. The real version. The fear and the confusion and the terrible moment when Coyote's body went limp against his shoulder. We were tracking an Iraqi sniper who had killed 7 coalition soldiers over 3 days. The words came slowly, each one pulled from somewhere deep inside. Jake and I had finally gotten a fix on his position. 800 meters across open ground, clear shot, perfect conditions. The gathering had gone quiet, everyone leaning in to hear a story that Marcus had never told to anyone. I was so focused on the target, so certain that if I just made this one shot, the killing would stop and we could go home. I did not see the counter-sniper team repositioning on our flank. I did not hear Jake calling the warning. All I could see was the crosshairs and the man I was about to kill. Marcus paused, his hand tightening on the plate he was holding. The shot that killed Jake came from less than 200 meters away. If I had been paying attention, if I had maintained proper awareness, if I had remembered that the mission is never just about the target, Elena spoke into the silence. My spotter died the same way. Same situation. Same failure. I was so locked onto my target that I forgot about everything else. Marcus looked at her across the gathering, 2 killers united by shared tragedy. I wrote Protocol 7 because of Jake. Every word, every technique, every reminder to check your flanks and trust your spotter and never forget that your teammates are more important than your targets. I thought if I could put it all into words, maybe other people would not make the same mistake. But I still made it. Elena's voice was barely audible. Despite everything you wrote, despite all my training, I still got tunnel vision. I still lost Hawk. Because words on paper are not enough. Marcus set down his plate and stood. Training is not enough. Experience is not enough. The only thing that might be enough is this. He gestured at the gathering, at the people and the food, and the music filling the desert air. Remembering why we fight, remembering who we are fighting for, not flags or countries or abstract principles. People, the ones sitting next to us, the ones waiting for us at home, the ones who depend on us to come back. James was watching his father with an expression that Marcus did not recognize. Pride, perhaps, or understanding, or some combination of both that defied simple categorization. I never understood. James's voice was rough. All those years, I thought you were choosing the mission over the family, choosing the war over us. But that was not it, was it? I was trying to protect you. Marcus met his son's eyes across the gathering. All of you, I thought if I could keep the darkness away, if I could fight the battles that needed fighting, then maybe you would not have to. Maybe you could have normal lives, normal families, normal futures. But we did not get normal lives. James stood up, moving toward his father. We got a father who was never there, a grandfather who was more myth than man. We got the weight without the explanation, the sacrifice without the understanding. I know, and I am sorry. The 2 words hung in the air, simple and inadequate, and yet somehow exactly right. Marcus had spent 45 years avoiding this conversation, running from the truth that his choices had consequences beyond the battlefield. Now, standing in the Arizona sun, surrounded by the people his life had touched, he finally found the courage to say what should have been said decades ago. I am sorry I was not there. I am sorry I let the mission become more important than the people waiting at home. I am sorry it took me 68 years to figure out that protecting my family does not mean staying away from them. James crossed the remaining distance and did something he had not done since childhood. He hugged his father, wrapped his arms around the old man, and held on like a drowning person clinging to a lifeline. The gathering watched in silence. Warriors who had seen terrible things, killers who understood the weight of taking life. They watched a father and son bridge a gap that had seemed unbridgeable, and something in the air shifted. Something that felt like healing. Ethan was next. He approached his grandfather with the uncertain steps of a young man who was still learning what manhood meant. When I was tied up in that canyon, when Kessler was talking about killing me, the only thing I could think about was you. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Not the legend, not the phantom, just my grandfather. The man who taught me to fish when I was 7. The man who came to my graduation even though he had just gotten back from deployment and had not slept in 3 days. I remember that graduation. I did not think you would come. Mom said you were on a mission, that it might not be possible, but then I looked up and you were there, sitting in the back row, looking like you might fall asleep any second. Marcus smiled at the memory. I did fall asleep. During the principal's speech, your grandmother had to wake me up when they called your name. But you were there. That is what mattered. Ethan's eyes were bright with emotion. That is what always mattered. Not that you were perfect, not that you never made mistakes, just that when it really counted, you showed up. The sun was beginning to set now, painting the sky in the same shades of red and gold that had witnessed so much violence over the past weeks. But this sunset felt different. This one felt like an ending that was also a beginning. Elena approached Marcus as the gathering began to wind down. She was carrying her case, the one that held the rifle that had saved so many lives and taken so many others. I have been thinking about your offer, to work on the protocols together. And I want to do it. But I want to do more than just write documents. I want to teach, actually work with the operators who will be using what we create. Make sure they understand not just the techniques, but the reasons behind them. That would mean coming out of the shadows. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of doubt or hesitation. No more anonymity, no more pretending to be someone else. I have been hiding for 4 years, hiding from who I am, what I can do, what I owe to the people who trained me and the people who died beside me. Elena straightened her shoulders, something resolving in her expression. I think it is time to stop hiding. It will not be easy. The work we do lives in darkness for a reason. I know, but maybe some of it deserves to live in light. Marcus looked at Elena, at James, at Ethan, at all the people who had gathered to honor the dead and celebrate the living. He thought about Coyote, about the 33 years he had spent carrying guilt like a stone in his chest. He thought about all the choices he had made and all the prices he had paid and all the people who had suffered because of his dedication to a cause that sometimes seemed too large to comprehend. And he made a decision. I am going to retire. The words fell into the evening air and seemed to hang there, impossible and yet somehow inevitable. James stared at him. Dad? Not immediately. Not until we have finished the work that needs to be done. But after that, after the protocols are written and the training is established, I am going to step back. Let the younger generation carry the weight. What will you do? Marcus looked at the desert, at the mountains where so much had happened, at the sky that was darkening with the first evening stars. I am going to learn how to be a grandfather, a real one. The kind who shows up for things that do not involve combat zones. The kind who teaches his grandson to fish and goes to baseball games and sits on the porch drinking beer and telling stories that do not end in body counts. And the ghosts? Elena asked quietly. The weight you carry? I will carry it until I die. There is no escaping that. But maybe I can carry it differently. Not as a burden that separates me from everyone else. As a reminder of why the people around me matter. Why every moment counts. Why love is worth more than any victory on any battlefield. The stars were fully visible now, the same stars that had witnessed the birth and death of empires, the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycle of violence and redemption that defined human existence. Marcus looked up at them and felt, for the first time in decades, something that might have been peace. Not the absence of pain, not the forgetting of loss, but an acceptance of both. a recognition that the weight he carried was not a punishment. It was a gift, a reminder that he had loved deeply enough to grieve deeply, that he had fought hard enough to bear scars that would never fully heal. Old soldiers never died. They just found new ways to live with what they had done. And sometimes, if they were very lucky, they found people to help them remember why living was worth the effort. The gathering ended slowly, people drifting away in twos and threes, carrying leftovers and memories in the particular warmth that came from shared experience. Marcus was the last to leave, standing alone in the yard as the desert night settled around him. He pulled out the photograph of himself and Coyote, the one he had carried for 33 years. The faces looked different now. Younger, yes. More innocent, certainly. But also somehow present in a way they had not been before. As if Jake Sullivan was not just a ghost from the past, but a presence that would walk beside Marcus for whatever remained of his life. "I am sorry it took so long." Marcus spoke the words aloud, letting them drift into the darkness. "I am sorry I carried you like a burden instead of like a friend, but I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." The wind stirred slightly, carrying the last traces of smoke from the gathering. The mission is not about killing the enemy. It is about protecting the people we love. And sometimes the best way to protect them is to let them in, to let them help carry the weight, to stop being a ghost and start being a man. Marcus tucked the photograph back into his pocket and walked toward his quarters. Tomorrow there would be work to do, protocols to write, operators to train, a legacy to build that would outlast his own limited lifespan. But tonight there was rest and memory, and the first tentative steps toward a future that did not require him to carry the weight alone. The desert held its silence. The stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere in the darkness, the ghosts of fallen comrades watched over a man who was finally learning that survival was not the same as living. That victory was not the same as peace. That sometimes the bravest thing a soldier could do was put down his weapon and pick up something heavier. Love, family, hope. The things that mattered more than any war. The night deepened around the base, but Marcus found that sleep would not come. His body was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that accumulated over decades of hard use. But his mind was restless, circling back to conversations and revelations that needed more time to process. He found himself walking toward the medical wing, where a single light still burned in one of the private rooms. Elena was there, he knew. She had volunteered for night watch over one of the operators who had been wounded in the extraction, a young man whose injuries were minor, but who had requested company during the long hours of recovery. She looked up when Marcus entered, her eyes showing neither surprise nor welcome. Just acknowledgement. "You should be sleeping." "So should you." She gestured to the chair beside her. The wounded operator was asleep, his breathing steady, his vital signs stable on the monitors that blinked quietly in the darkness. They sat in silence for a while, watching the machines do their work, listening to the soft sounds of the medical facility at night. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than the equipment. "Tell me about Kuwait." Marcus stiffened slightly. She had heard him mention it at the gathering, but she was asking for more now. The details he had never shared. The memories he had kept locked away for 33 years. "Why do you want to know?" "Because we are the same." Elena turned to face him, her gray-blue eyes reflecting the dim light from the monitors. "We carry the same wound. We made the same mistake. And we have both been trying to outrun it ever since." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he began to speak. February 1991. Desert storm. Jake Sullivan and I had been tracking an Iraqi sniper who had been terrorizing coalition forces along the border. The man was good, trained by the Soviets, we thought, based on his methodology and his choice of positions. He had killed 7 of our people in 3 days, always from impossible angles, always disappearing before we could respond. The memories came easier than he expected, as if speaking them aloud to someone who understood was somehow different from speaking them to his own reflection in a mirror. We finally got a fix on his location, a ridge overlooking a supply route that our convoys had been using. Jake spotted the hide first. He always had better eyes than me, could see things at distances that should have been impossible. "What was he like?" Elena asked quietly. "Your spotter." Jake was the best I ever worked with. Marcus felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the pain of the memory. He had this laugh that could fill a room, this way of finding humor in situations that should have been terrifying. We used to joke that the reason we survived so long was because God could not bear to silence that laugh. The smile faded. The day he died, we had been in position for 6 hours, waiting for the Iraqi sniper to show himself. Jake was getting restless. He kept humming this country song under his breath, some Willie Nelson tune that he had been obsessed with for weeks. Red-headed stranger. Marcus looked at her in surprise. You know it? Hawk used to hum it too. Elena's voice was barely audible. Said it reminded him of home. The coincidence was almost too much to bear. Two spotters, separated by decades, united by a song and a fate that neither deserved. The shot was complicated, 800 meters through variable wind conditions. I had to factor in elevation changes, humidity, the heat shimmer coming off the sand, all the calculations that turn marksmanship into mathematics. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. I remember the exact moment, the crosshairs settling on the target, my finger tightening on the trigger, the world narrowing to just that single point of focus. Tunnel vision, complete, absolute, the kind of focus that makes you unstoppable and blind at the same time. I did not hear Jake calling the warning. I did not see the counter-sniper team moving into position on our flank. All I could see was the man I was about to kill. He paused, the next words coming hard. Jake's warning was the last thing he ever said. Watch the high ground, Marcus. Always watch the high ground. And then the bullet found him, through his left temple. The same as Hawk, the same as 1,000 other spotters who died because their shooters forgot that the mission is about more than the target. How did you survive? Luck. Pure stupid luck. The counter-sniper team was set up to engage both of us, but Jake was their priority target. They figured if they took out the spotter first, I would be disoriented, unable to respond. By the time they realized I was still combat effective, I had already repositioned. Elena was very still, listening with the attention of someone who understood exactly what he was describing. I killed them all. 3 counter-snipers. Eliminated in less than 2 minutes. Then I carried Jake's body 3 kilometers back to the extraction point. I would not leave him there, could not leave him in that desert to be scavenged by animals and forgotten by history. The memory of that walk was seared into Marcus's brain, the weight of Coyote's body across his shoulders, the blood soaking into his uniform, the endless sand stretching in every direction, mocking him with its indifference. They gave me a medal for that, a bronze star for carrying my dead friend through hostile territory. As if bravery could make up for the failure that put him on my shoulders in the first place. I know that feeling. Elena's hand moved to her own chest, touching a spot where her own medal might have hung. They offered me a silver star after Bulgaria. For completing the mission even after Hawk died, I refused it, told them to file it somewhere I would never have to see it. They sat in silence for a while, 2 killers united by shared loss, watching the wounded operator sleep. After Kuwait, Marcus continued, I became obsessed with preventing it from happening again. To anyone, I started writing. At first it was just notes, observations about what had gone wrong, analysis of the mistakes I had made. But it grew into something more, a complete methodology for maintaining situational awareness during high-stress operations. Protocol 7, and the others that followed. I poured everything I knew into those documents. Every lesson I had learned, every technique I had developed, every reminder that a sniper's job is not just about taking shots. It is about keeping your team alive. But it was not enough. No, it was not enough because you cannot teach someone to overcome their own nature through words on paper. The focus that makes a great sniper is the same focus that creates tunnel vision. The intensity that allows you to take shots at impossible distances is the same intensity that blinds you to threats outside your field of view. How do you teach someone to be both focused and aware at the same time? Marcus looked at Elena, at this woman who had taken his protocols and evolved them into something he had never imagined. I do not know. That is the truth. After all these years, I still do not have an answer. But I think the question itself might be wrong. What do you mean? Maybe it is not about being focused and aware at the same time. Maybe it is about knowing when to switch between them. When to narrow your attention to the target. When to widen it to the environment. Learning to flow between states instead of trying to hold both simultaneously. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Hawk used to say something like that. He called it breathing with your vision. Narrow on the inhale, wide on the exhale, creating a rhythm that kept you anchored in both worlds. That is exactly right. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, not quite hope, not quite understanding, something in between. We had been thinking about it wrong all these years, Training snipers to maintain constant awareness is like training someone to hold their breath indefinitely. Eventually it fails, but training them to cycle between focus and awareness, that might actually work. Is that what you want to put in the new protocols? That and more. Everything we have learned, everything we have lost, the techniques that work and the ones that failed, a complete methodology for the next generation of operators. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the desert night. When I left Shadow Talons, I thought I was running away from who I was, trying to become someone else, someone who did not see the world through rifle scopes, someone who could walk down the street without automatically identifying firing positions and escape routes. And now I realize that running does not work. The skills do not go away. The instincts do not disappear. All that happens is you carry them around like a disease, infecting every part of your life without ever using them for anything good. So what is the alternative? Using them to protect others from making the same mistakes we made, turning our scars into shields, our wounds into wisdom. Marcus stood and joined her at the window. That is what Coyote would have wanted, what Hawk would have wanted, not for us to suffer in silence, not for us to carry the weight alone until it crushed us, but for us to use what happened to them to save others from the same fate. Can we actually do that? We can try. And if we fail, at least we will fail while moving forward, while building something instead of just destroying. The night was beginning to fade now, the first hints of dawn appearing on the eastern horizon. Another day approaching, another chance to do something that mattered. Thank you, Elena's voice was soft, for telling me about Kuwait, for letting me see the person behind the legend. Thank you for listening, for understanding, for being willing to help carry the weight. They stood together as the sun rose over the desert, two warriors at the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Behind them, the wounded operator stirred in his sleep, dreaming whatever dreams soldiers dream in the spaces between violence. The ghosts were still there. They would always be there, but somehow in the light of the rising sun, they seemed less like accusers and more like companions. Fellow travelers on a road that led through darkness and back out into light. Marcus thought about Coyote, about the photograph he still carried in his pocket. He thought about the 33 years he had spent trying to outrun a moment that could never be undone. And he realized with something like wonder that running was finally over. Not because the pain had ended, not because the guilt had lifted, but because he had found people who understood, people who carried the same weight, people who were willing to help him build something that might redeem the losses they had all suffered. The sun cleared the horizon, flooding the desert with golden light. A new day had begun, and for the first time in longer than Marcus could remember, he was not afraid of what it might bring. 6 months had passed since the canyon. The Arizona desert had cycled through its seasons, from the brutal heat of summer through the brief respite of autumn and into the mild winter that passed for cold in this part of the country. The mountains where Victor Kessler had built his trap still stood on the horizon, unchanged by the violence that had erupted in their shadows. The desert did not care about human drama. It simply endured, patient and eternal, keeping its secrets until the end of time. Marcus Cole sat on the porch of a small house that he had purchased 3 months ago, watching the sun set behind those distant peaks. The house was nothing special. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a yard that needed work, and a roof that would need replacing within the next few years. But it was his, not a base housing unit, not a temporary billet between deployments. A home in the truest sense of the word. The Colt 1911 still sat in its holster on his hip. Some habits could not be broken, and Marcus had long ago accepted that he would carry that weight until the day he died. But the weight felt different now. Less like a burden and more like a companion, a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. The official retirement ceremony had taken place 2 weeks ago in a conference room at the Pentagon that was too small for the number of people who wanted to attend. 4-star generals had stood beside fresh-faced lieutenants, all of them paying tribute to a man whose career had spanned 5 decades and touched more lives than any of them could count. The speeches had been long and full of words like honor and sacrifice and service, words that had once meant everything to Marcus and now felt like echoes from a distant past. He had worn his dress uniform for the last time, the medals and ribbons covering his chest like a map of the wars he had fought, the Bronze Star from Kuwait, the Silver Star from operations that still could not be discussed publicly, the Purple Heart that commemorated wounds both visible and invisible. Looking at all that metal and cloth, Marcus had felt like a museum exhibit, a relic from a time that the modern world was rapidly forgetting. The ceremony had ended with the presentation of a flag folded into the traditional triangle, placed in his hands by a young Marine whose eyes held the same fire that Marcus had carried at that age. The symbolism was not lost on him. One generation passing the torch to the next, the endless cycle of service and sacrifice continuing long after he stepped aside. Now, sitting on his porch with a glass of bourbon warming in his hand, Marcus thought about all the ceremonies he had attended over the years, the ones that honored the living and the ones that mourned the dead. They blurred together in his memory, a long procession of faces and flags and words spoken over caskets that held men too young to die. But this ceremony was different. This one marked not an ending but a transformation, not a death but a rebirth into something he had never allowed himself to imagine. The sound of a vehicle approaching pulled his attention back to the present. He watched as a pickup truck navigated the dirt road that led to his property, dust rising behind it in a plume that caught the last light of the setting sun. He knew the truck. He had been expecting it. Elena Ashford stepped out of the driver's side, her movements still carrying that economical grace that had first caught his attention in the briefing room 6 months ago. She was wearing civilian clothes now, jeans and a flannel shirt that made her look almost normal. Almost like someone who had not killed 187 people in service to her country. She walked up to the porch and accepted the glass of bourbon that Marcus had already poured for her. The protocols are finished. She took a seat in the chair beside him, looking out at the same sunset. SOCOM approved them this morning. Official designation is Protocol 7 revised, but the operators are already calling it something else. What are they calling it? The Ghost Manual. Elena almost smiled. Apparently someone leaked the story of what happened in the canyon. Now every sniper in the special operations community knows about the old commander and the shadow operative who took down Victor Kessler. I thought that information was classified. It is, officially. But soldiers talk, stories spread, the legend grows. Elena took a sip of her bourbon. You are already becoming a myth, Marcus. The last of the Cold War phantoms. The man who wrote the book on modern sniper operations and then came out of retirement for one final mission. Marcus shook his head slowly. I did not come out of retirement. I had never actually retired. Details. The story is what matters. And the story they are telling is a good one. A story about duty and sacrifice and redemption. A story that young operators will repeat to each other in barracks, in training facilities, for decades to come. The sunset was reaching its peak now, the sky blazing with colors that seemed almost artificial in their intensity. Red and gold and purple, layered one upon another like paint on a canvas. Marcus watched the display in silence, thinking about all the sunsets he had seen over 68 years of life, the beautiful ones and the terrible ones. The ones that marked the end of battles and the ones that preceded moments of peace. How is the training going? Elena set down her glass. Better than I expected. The new recruits are hungry for what we are teaching them. The techniques, the philosophy, the understanding that their job is not just about taking shots, but about keeping their teams alive. Are they learning the breathing technique, the one Hawk developed? Every one of them. Elena's voice softened at the mention of her fallen spotter. It is part of the core curriculum now. Breathing with your vision, narrow on the inhale, wide on the exhale, creating a rhythm that keeps them anchored in both focused attention and situational awareness. Hawk would be proud. I think he would. Elena was quiet for a moment. I named the technique after him in the official documentation, the Morrison method, so that his contribution will be remembered by every operator who learns it. Marcus felt something ease in his chest, a weight that he had not even realized he was still carrying. That was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. Elena turned to look at him directly. We carry our dead with us, Marcus. That is what this work has taught me. Not as burdens, but as teachers. Their mistakes become our lessons. Their sacrifices become our motivation. Their names become part of the legacy we leave behind. The Morrison method and the Sullivan protocols. Two ghosts still teaching warriors from beyond the grave. And the Cole doctrine. Elena smiled. That is what they are calling your contribution. The overarching philosophy that ties everything together. The idea that combat is not just about killing the enemy, but about protecting the people who depend on you. I did not ask them to name it after me. You did not have to. Some legacies name themselves. The sun had dropped below the mountains now, leaving only a residual glow on the horizon. The first stars were beginning to appear, faint pinpricks of light against the darkening sky. Marcus watched them emerge, thinking about all the nights he had spent under similar skies, in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands, watching the same stars a wheel overhead while he waited for targets that might never appear. Those days were behind him now, the waiting, the watching, the constant calculation of angles and distances, and the terrible mathematics of taking human life. He had passed that burden to the next generation, equipped them with everything he knew, and trusted them to carry it forward. But the memories remained. They would always remain. There is something else I need to tell you. Elena's voice cut through his reverie, something I learned during the final debrief on Kessler. Marcus turned to face her, his instincts sharpening despite the peaceful setting. What did you learn? The truth about Panama. Elena's expression was carefully neutral. He was not lying, Marcus, about the civilians, about the orders he refused to follow. The records were buried deep, but I found them. Everything he said was true. Marcus absorbed this information in silence. He had suspected as much ever since that confrontation in the canyon. The way Kessler had spoken about the woman and her child. The conviction in his voice when he described the impossible choice he had faced. It had not sounded like the words of a man constructing a convenient fiction. Does it change anything? I do not know. Elena took another sip of her bourbon. He still became a monster. He still killed for money for 35 years. He still tried to murder you and your grandson. The reason he started down that path does not erase the path itself. But it adds context. It adds tragedy. Elena's voice hardened slightly. He could have been one of us, Marcus, if the system had not broken him. If he had found another way to respond to an impossible situation. He had the skills. He had the training. He just did not have anyone to help him carry the weight. Marcus thought about his own journey, the years of guilt and isolation, the walls he had built around himself to keep the pain contained. If not for Elena, if not for James and Ethan, if not for the gathering that had forced him to confront the ghosts he had been running from, he might have ended up on a similar path. What happened to him? He is still in the black site, still being interrogated. The information he has provided has already led to the dismantling of 3 assassination networks and the arrest of over 24 operatives. Elena paused. They offered him a deal. Reduced sentence in exchange for continued cooperation. Did he take it? No. He said he would rather die in a cell than spend the rest of his life helping the same government that betrayed him. Elena shook her head slowly. Even now, after everything, he cannot let go of the resentment. Some wounds never heal. And some people never learn how to live with them. They sat in silence as the night deepened around them. The stars were fully visible now, the Milky Way stretching across the sky in a band of pale light that had guided travelers for thousands of years. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its voice rising and falling in the darkness like a song from another world. Marcus thought about Jake Sullivan, about the nickname they had given him because of his ability to mimic that same sound. Coyote, his friend, his brother in arms, the man whose death had shaped the next 33 years of Marcus's life. I told you about the dream I used to have. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. The one where Jake is calling my name from somewhere, just beyond the edge of darkness, where I am trying to reach him, but I can never quite get there. You mentioned it. I had the dream again last night, but it was different this time. Elena waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. In the dream, I finally reached him, finally made it through the darkness to wherever he was waiting. And when I found him, he was not angry. He was not accusing me of failing him. He was just standing there, smiling, the way he used to smile before everything went wrong. What did he say? He said it was time to stop running, time to stop carrying the weight like punishment and start carrying it like wisdom. He said the best thing I could do to honor his memory was to live, really live. Not just survive from one day to the next, but actually engage with the world and the people in it. Marcus paused, his throat tightening around the words. And then he said goodbye. Not the kind of goodbye that hurts, the kind that gives permission. Like he was releasing me from an obligation I had been carrying for 3 decades, telling me it was okay to move forward, okay to be happy, okay to let the wound become a scar. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Hawk came to me too in a dream, about a month after we finished the protocols. He was standing in the kitchen of the restaurant he always wanted to open, cooking brisket, humming that Willie Nelson song. What did he say? He said thank you for finishing what he started, for making sure his recipes did not die with him, for carrying his memory forward into the world instead of letting it sink into the darkness. Two ghosts, finally at peace, or two memories, finally integrated. Elena finished her bourbon and set the glass aside. The psychological literature calls it adaptive grieving, the process of transforming loss into growth, turning the weight of the dead into the foundation for something new. I did not know you read psychological literature. I read everything now. Elena almost smiled. Turns out that retirement gives you time for hobbies. Even if your idea of a hobby is studying the neuroscience of trauma recovery. And what have you learned? That we are resilient, that the human mind has an incredible capacity to heal from damage that should be permanent, that the key is not forgetting or suppressing, but integrating, making peace with the parts of ourselves that carry scars, learning to live with the weight instead of being crushed by it. Marcus looked at her, at this woman who had come into his life as a mystery and become something like a partner. Not in the romantic sense, in the deeper sense. Two warriors who had walked the same path. Two killers who were learning to become something more than the sum of their kills. What happens now? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. I continue the training. There is a new class starting next month, 15 candidates from across the special operations community. The best of the best, according to their files. I will spend 6 weeks teaching them everything we developed. The techniques, the philosophy, the understanding that their job is to protect as much as to destroy. And after that, there is always another class, another group of young operators who need to learn what took us decades to figure out. I will keep teaching until I cannot teach anymore, until someone better comes along to take my place. Marcus nodded slowly. The cycle continuing, the legacy passing from one generation to the next, the endless process of training warriors who would train more warriors who would train still more, an unbroken chain stretching forward into a future neither of them would live to see. And you? Elena turned the question back to him. What does retirement look like for the Phantom of Ramadi? Marcus thought about the question. He had been thinking about it for months, ever since he made the decision to step away from the only life he had ever known. The answers had come slowly, forming themselves out of reflection and conversation and the gradual realization that there was more to existence than the mission. I am going to be a grandfather. A real one, not the kind who shows up between deployments and disappears again before the memories have time to form. Ethan is being stationed at Camp Pendleton next month, close enough that I can drive there on weekends, close enough that I can actually be present in his life. James told me. Elena's expression softened. He said the two of you have been talking more. We have a lot of years to make up for. Marcus looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars that mapped the history of his career. I wasted so much time, Elena, running from the people who needed me, hiding behind the mission because facing my family felt harder than facing combat. You cannot change the past. No, but I can change the future. I can be there for Ethan in ways I was never there for James. I can show him that the work does not have to consume everything, that you can serve your country without sacrificing your humanity. The wisdom of age, the regret of age, Marcus corrected. Wisdom is what happens when you finally pay attention to what the regret is trying to teach you. A car was approaching on the distant road, its headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights across a battlefield. Marcus watched it come closer, recognizing the vehicle before it turned into his driveway. Ethan had called earlier in the day asking if he could stop by on his way back to base. Marcus had said yes without hesitation, because that was who he was now, the grandfather who said yes, the old man who made time for family. The truck pulled up beside Elena's vehicle and Ethan climbed out, still wearing his dress uniform from some event that had kept him away from his duties. The young man looked different than he had 6 months ago, more settled, more confident. The nervous energy that had characterized him in the briefing room had been replaced by something steadier. The calmness of a warrior who had faced his fears and emerged stronger. Grandfather. Elena. Ethan nodded to both of them as he climbed the porch steps. I hope I am not interrupting. You are always welcome here. Marcus stood and pulled another chair into position. Sit. Tell me about your day. Ethan settled into the offered seat, accepting the glass of bourbon that Elena poured for him from the bottle on the small table. There was a memorial service today for Petty Officers Williams and Chen, the two men who died in the initial ambush. The names hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had known them, of course, had trained with them, had written letters to their families after the operation was complete. But hearing the names spoken aloud in the casual context of a conversation on a porch brought the loss back with fresh intensity. I remember them. The service was beautiful. Ethan's voice was steady, controlled. Their families spoke. Their teammates shared stories. There was a 21-gun salute and a bugler playing taps in all the ritual that the military uses to honor its fallen. He paused, something shifting in his expression. But the part that hit me hardest was something small, a detail that most people probably did not even notice. Williams had a daughter, 7 years old. She was sitting in the front row holding a folded flag that was almost bigger than she was. And she was not crying, she was just staring straight ahead, like she was trying to understand something that did not make sense. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had seen that look before. Too many times. The confusion of children confronted with the reality that their fathers were never coming home. That is the cost. His voice was rough. That is what we do not talk about in the briefings and the training manuals. The children who grow up without their fathers. The families that are broken by our choices. The price that other people pay for our service. I know, Ethan met his grandfather's eyes directly, and I have been thinking about it ever since. About whether the cost is worth it. About whether what we do actually makes a difference, or whether we are just perpetuating a cycle of violence that creates more enemies than it eliminates. What conclusion did you reach? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass. I do not have a conclusion. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I know that I am going to keep asking the question, keep wrestling with the doubt, keep remembering that the people we kill have families too. Children who will grow up without their fathers. Wives who will sleep alone for the rest of their lives. He looked up, and Marcus saw something in his grandson's eyes that had not been there 6 months ago. A depth, a weight, the beginning of the burden that every warrior eventually carries. You told me once that the best operators are the ones who never stop questioning, who carry the doubt with them into every mission, who remember that the trigger they are pulling ends a human life, not just eliminates a target. I remember saying that. I am starting to understand what you meant. Ethan finished his bourbon and set the glass aside. The training teaches us how to kill. The protocols teach us how to stay alive. But nothing prepares us for the weight, for the knowledge that we have changed the world in ways that can never be undone. Marcus reached out and put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. The gesture felt unfamiliar, awkward. Physical affection had never been his strength, but it was what the moment required. The weight does not get lighter. Not with time, not with experience, not with any amount of justification or rationalization. It just becomes something you learn to carry. How do you carry it? You find people who understand. Marcus looked at Elena, at this woman who had become his partner in a work that mattered more than any mission he had ever undertaken. You let them help you. You stop trying to bear the burden alone. And when there is no one else, then you reach out. You break the silence that keeps you isolated. You admit that you need help, even when admitting it feels like weakness, because the alternative is being crushed by a weight that was never meant to be carried alone. The night had deepened while they talked. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath them. The coyote called again, its voice echoing across the desert like a morning song. I have to get back to base. Ethan stood, straightening his uniform. But I wanted you to know something first. What is that? The photograph. The one you carry in your pocket. The one of you and Coyote in Kuwait. Marcus's hand moved involuntarily to his pocket, feeling the familiar shape of the photograph he had carried for 33 years. I have started carrying one too. Ethan's voice was steady. Of Williams and Chen, so that I never forget what the cost looks like. So that every time I consider pulling a trigger, I remember that someone's daughter might be holding a flag because of my choice. Marcus felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back, not from embarrassment, but from the overwhelming sense that something important was happening. A transmission of wisdom from one generation to the next, a torch being passed in the darkness. That is exactly right. Ethan nodded once, a gesture that said more than words could convey. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, his footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. Marcus watched him go, watched the taillights disappear down the road, watched until there was nothing left but darkness and stars and the weight of everything he had built and everything he had lost. Elena stood beside him, silent, present. He is going to be all right. Yes, Marcus's voice was barely audible. He is going to be better than all right. He is going to be the best of us. Because of what you taught him? Because of what we all taught him. Marcus turned to look at her. The protocols, the techniques, the philosophy of carrying the weight without being crushed by it. All of it came together in that young man. All of it prepared him to face what is coming. What is coming? Marcus looked out at the desert, at the mountains, at the vast darkness that stretched toward horizons he could not see. Everything. The wars we cannot imagine. The enemies we have not yet met. The challenges that will test every lesson we have learned and every principle we have developed. He is walking into a future that we helped create, and he is carrying tools that did not exist when we started our journeys. The legacy of ghosts. The legacy of everyone who came before, every warrior who learned the hard way, every teacher who passed on what they knew, every fallen comrade whose sacrifice became a lesson for those who survived. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. Coyote's face smiled up at him from the past, frozen forever in a moment before everything changed. I think I am finally ready to let you go. The words were spoken to the photograph, to the memory, to the ghost that had walked beside him for 3 decades. Not to forget you, never that, but to carry you differently, as wisdom instead of weight, as gratitude instead of guilt. He looked at the photograph for a long moment, then slowly he handed it to Elena. Keep this. Put it in the training facility. Let every new operator see it. Let them know that the man in this picture gave his life so that they could live. Let his sacrifice mean something beyond my personal grief. Elena took the photograph with reverent hands. Are you sure? I am sure. Marcus felt something release in his chest, a knot that had been tied so long he had forgotten what freedom felt like. The weight is not mine alone anymore. It belongs to everyone who learns from what we have built. They can help carry it. They should help carry it. The night was fully dark now, the last traces of sunset long faded from the sky. But Marcus did not feel the darkness as threatening. It was peaceful, natural, the ending of one day and the promise of another. Old soldiers never die. He spoke the words softly, letting them drift into the desert air. They just find new ways to live. Elena nodded once, a gesture of understanding, and new people to live for. They stood together on the porch, 2 warriors at the end of their wars, watching the stars wheel overhead. Behind them, the house was warm and waiting. Ahead of them, the future stretched out like the desert itself, vast and unknown and full of possibilities. Marcus Cole had spent 68 years preparing for battles, learning to fight, learning to kill, learning to carry the weight of violence without being destroyed by it. Now finally, he was learning something different. He was learning to live, not in spite of the ghosts, but because of them. Not denying the past, but honoring it. Not running from the weight, but sharing it with the people who had become his family. The desert held its secrets. The stars kept their ancient watch. And somewhere in the darkness, the ghosts of fallen warriors stood guard over a man who had finally found his peace. Not the peace of forgetting, the peace of integration. The peace that came from turning wounds into wisdom and losses into lessons, and a lifetime of violence into a legacy of protection. This was the inheritance he would leave behind. Not medals or commendations or the empty praise of ceremonies, but a methodology for survival, a philosophy for carrying the weight, a reminder that the mission was never just about killing the enemy. It was about bringing your people home, all of them, including yourself. The end. The morning after Elena and Ethan left, Marcus woke with the sunrise for the first time in months, not from nightmares or restless thoughts, but from something simpler. The natural rhythm of a body that had finally learned to rest. He made coffee in the small kitchen of his new home, moving through the ritual with the same precision he had once applied to cleaning weapons and calculating trajectories. Some habits were worth keeping. The attention to detail, the methodical approach to tasks, the understanding that small things done well created the foundation for larger successes. The coffee was good, strong and bitter, the way he had always preferred it. He carried the mug to the porch and settled into the chair that had become his favorite spot for watching the world wake up. The desert was beautiful in the early morning light. The air was cool enough to require a light jacket. Birds called to each other from the scrub brush surrounding his property. Marcus thought about all the mornings he had missed over 45 years of service. He did not regret those mornings. They had been necessary, but he was grateful to finally have mornings like this one. Quiet ones, peaceful ones. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. Elena, checking in as she had started doing every few days. New class started yesterday. 15 candidates, all exceptional. One of them reminds me of you at that age. Stubborn, talented, convinced he already knows everything. Marcus smiled at the description. He typed back a response. Break him down gently. The stubborn ones often make the best warriors once they learn to listen. Elena's reply came quickly. I know, you taught me that. The exchange was simple, almost trivial, but it represented connection. The ongoing relationship with someone who understood his world. He set down the phone and returned his attention to the desert. The memories came easier now than they had in the months immediately following the canyon. Not as sharp, not as painful, more like old photographs than fresh wounds. He could look at them without flinching, could examine them for the lessons they contained rather than the guilt they represented. Coyote's face appeared in his mind, not the frozen image from the photograph he had given to Elena, but a living memory. Jake Sullivan laughing at a joke that was not particularly funny. Jake Sullivan calling wind readings with the calm precision that had made him invaluable. Jake Sullivan dying in the sand with a bullet through his temple, his last words a warning that had come too late. Watch the high ground, Marcus. Always watch the high ground. Marcus had spent 33 years treating those words as an accusation, a final condemnation from a friend who had died because of his failure. But sitting on his porch in the Arizona morning, he finally understood what Coyote had actually meant. The warning was not about the past, it was about the future. A reminder to stay alert, to maintain awareness, to never forget that danger could come from unexpected directions. Coyote had not been blaming Marcus for the failure that killed him. He had been trying to protect Marcus from making the same mistake again. The realization shifted something fundamental in Marcus's understanding of his own history. For 3 decades, he had carried guilt that was never meant to be carried, had punished himself for a failure that his friend had already forgiven in the moment of dying. Old soldiers did not die. They just found new ways to understand the battles they had already fought. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Marcus had never experienced. Mornings on the porch with coffee and sunrise. Afternoons working on the house. Evenings with phone calls to James or visits from Ethan. He learned to cook, a skill he had never developed during his years of service. Simple dishes at first. Gradually more complex meals as he gained confidence. The discipline of following recipes was not so different from the discipline of following protocols. Elena visited twice during those weeks, staying overnight in the spare bedroom. They talked for hours about the training and the new operators and the ways that the protocols were evolving. The work was continuing without him, growing beyond anything he could have built alone. The legacy expanding outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. She brought updates about Kessler too, though Marcus did not ask for them. The information came in fragments, pieces of a story that was still unfolding in the black sites and interrogation rooms that existed outside normal legal frameworks. Victor had cooperated more than anyone expected, not because of any change of heart, but because talking gave him something to do. He provided detailed information about networks and operatives. The intelligence services were using his information carefully. 6 more networks had been identified. Dozens of operatives had been arrested or neutralized. But Kessler himself remained unbroken, unrepentant. He asked about you. Elena mentioned during one of her visits. Wanted to know if you were still alive, if the wound he gave you in the canyon had healed. Marcus touched his throat, where the bruises had long since faded, but the memory remained. What did you tell him? That you were better than ever. That you had retired to a house in Arizona. That you were spending your time being a grandfather instead of a ghost. Elena paused, something flickering in her expression. He laughed when I told him that, said it was appropriate, that you had always been better at building things than destroying them, that he had never understood that about you until it was too late. Marcus absorbed this information in silence. There was something almost tragic in the portrait that emerged. Victor Kessler, locked in a cell, confronting the reality that the man he had envied for 50 years had found something that he himself would never possess. Peace, purpose, the ability to step away from violence and build something new. Does he ever express regret? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. Not in the way you might expect. He does not apologize for the killing, does not wish he had made different choices. But sometimes when he talks about the early days, there is something in his voice that sounds almost like mourning. Grief for a version of himself that might have existed if things had gone differently. She looked at Marcus directly. He told me once that the worst part of his life was not the violence. It was the loneliness. 35 years of living in shadows, trusting no one, building networks based on mutual self-interest rather than genuine connection. He said that you had something he never figured out how to create. What did he think I had? Loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that people give freely because they believe in you, not because they fear you or need something from you. He said that was your true advantage over him, that no matter how skilled he became, he could never command that kind of devotion. Marcus thought about the people who had followed him over the decades, the operators who had trusted him with their lives. He had never fully understood what he had done to earn that trust. But maybe Kessler was right. Maybe there was some quality of character that inspired loyalty without demanding it, some capacity for connection that Victor Kessler had never developed. The difference was not in what they could do, it was in who they had become. A month after that conversation, Marcus received a call from a number he did not recognize. He answered cautiously, his old instincts still functional even in retirement. "Commander Cole?" The voice was young, unfamiliar. Marcus could hear background noise that suggested a military facility. Training rooms, perhaps. The echo of spaces designed for function rather than comfort. Speaking. "Who is this?" "My name is Sergeant First Class Amanda Rivera. I am one of the instructors working with Miss Ashford on the Protocol 7 revised program." Marcus felt his attention sharpen. Elena had mentioned that she was bringing in additional instructors as the program expanded, but she had not discussed the details. "What can I do for you, Sergeant?" "I wanted to thank you, sir." Rivera's voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "I was in the last cohort of the original Shadow Talons program. Before it was shut down, I trained under the old protocols." Marcus understood immediately what she was saying. She had learned from Kessler's methods, had been shaped by techniques that included the kill switches and vulnerabilities that Elena had spent years identifying and eliminating. "How are you doing with the transition?" "It is difficult, sir," Rivera admitted. "Unlearning what you have been taught is harder than learning it in the first place. But Ms. Ashford has been patient, and the new protocols make sense in a way the old ones never did." "In what way?" "The old training taught us that we were weapons, tools to be deployed. The new training teaches us that we are protectors, people who choose to stand between danger and those who cannot defend themselves." Rivera paused. "It sounds like a small distinction, but it changes everything." "That was the goal." "I know, sir, and I wanted you to know that it is working, not just for me, for everyone who has gone through the program. We are becoming something different, something better. And it is because of what you and Miss Ashford built together." Marcus felt something warm spreading through his chest, not pride exactly, something closer to satisfaction. The knowledge that the work was continuing, that the legacy was taking root in minds and hearts he would never meet. "Thank you for telling me that, Sergeant. It means more than you know." "One more thing, sir." "Yes?" "There is a wall in this training facility where we put photographs of the people who shaped the program. The instructors, the contributors, the ones who came before us. Miss Ashford put a picture there recently of a young man in desert camouflage standing in front of a burned-out tank." Marcus's throat tightened. "She said his name was Jake Sullivan, that he was the first teacher, the one who gave you the lesson that became the foundation for everything else." "That is right. We honor him, sir, every day. Before we begin training, we stand in front of that wall and remember the people who made our work possible." Rivera's voice softened. "I never met Sergeant Sullivan, but I feel like I know him. Because of what you built, because of what Ms. Ashford teaches. His sacrifice matters, sir, even 33 years later. It matters more than ever." Marcus could not speak. The words caught in his throat, trapped by emotion that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. "Thank you, Sergeant," was all he could manage. "Thank you for telling me." The call ended, but the impact lingered. Marcus sat on his porch for a long time after, watching the desert change colors as the sun moved across the sky. Jake Sullivan, Coyote, the friend who had died because Marcus made a mistake. The man whose final words had haunted 3 decades of sleepless nights. His photograph was hanging on a wall in a training facility, honored by warriors who had never known him. His sacrifice was being remembered by people who understood what it had cost and what it had made possible. The weight was still there, would always be there, but it felt different now. Lighter, shared, carried by a community of warriors who had accepted it as their own inheritance, their own responsibility, their own reminder that the work they did had consequences beyond themselves. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed a message to Elena. Thank you for the photograph, for the wall, for making sure he is not forgotten. Her response came within minutes. He was never going to be forgotten, not while you were alive, but now he will be remembered by people who never knew him. That is what legacy means. The dead live on in the lessons we teach to the living. Marcus read the words 3 times, letting them sink into the places where guilt and grief had lived for so long. Then he set down the phone and watched the sun complete its journey across the Arizona sky. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more calls to make, more visits from family and friends. But for now, in this moment, there was only peace. The peace of a soldier who had finally come home. The peace of a ghost who had learned to live again. The peace of a man who had discovered that the end of fighting was not the end of purpose. Old soldiers never died. They just found new battles to fight, new ways to serve, new reasons to believe that the weight they carried was worth carrying. Marcus Cole had been lucky, and he would spend whatever time remained making sure that luck was shared with everyone who came after him. That was the true end of the story. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. Not an ending, but a beginning. The last Phantom had finally found his peace, and the ghosts who had guided him there were finally free to rest.